Welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, September 28th, 2022. This meeting is now called to order. Staff, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Thomas?
Present.
Commissioner Tavana?
Here.
Commissioner Raspy?
Here.
Commissioner Janoff?
Here.
Commissioner Clark is not with us this evening. Vice Chair Barnett?
Here.
Chair Hansen?
Here as well. And I will leave it with staff to address the rules of decorum and civility for our town public meetings.
The public is welcome to participate in the meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meeting is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the agenda. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at board, commission, or committee meetings. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at board, commission, or committee meetings. All public comments at the board, commission, or committee meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the chair may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the commissioners exiting the chamber or meeting room. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the commissioners would return to the chamber or meeting room and the chair would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a board, commission, or committee meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code, Section 403.
Thank you for that. And now we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is verbal communications. The Town of Los Gatos strongly encourages public participation in its meetings. And we have several ways public can participate. First is written communications. Written communications received through staff prior to our meeting are always welcome and helpful. And then there are two opportunities to participate in verbal communications. The first is at this point in the agenda, which is members of the public may speak on any item that is not on the agenda. And then during the hearing on any specific agenda item, we will also take public comments and you may speak up to 3 minutes on any item that is on the agenda at that time. So I'd like to find out if any members of the public would like to speak on any items of the agenda at this point in time. And if so, please do raise your hand.
So please raise your hand if you wish to speak on an item that's not on the agenda today. I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, well, then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. Any member of the public or the Planning Commission is able to pull items from the consent calendar to be heard in the public hearing sections of our meeting. The only item on the consent calendar for this evening is the draft minutes of our last Planning Commission meeting, which was on Wednesday, September 14th. And I'd like to find out if there's any member of the public or the commission that would like to pull this item for consideration during the regular meeting. I don't see any hands raised on the commission or from the attendees. Okay, and are there any commissioners that have any recommended changes to the minutes before I ask for a motion? Okay, I don't see any. So may I get a motion for approval of the consent calendar? Commissioner Tabana.
Yes, I move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Raspy.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you for that. And so then I will go ahead and I will call the question, and please answer yes, no, or abstain. And I'll start with Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Tabana.
Yes.
Commissioner Raspy.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so it passes unanimously. And so then we will go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 2, and it is a public hearing. And it is requesting approval for the demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence on property zone R18, located at 15602 Benedict Lane, APN 424-22-008, architecture and site application S-21-036. The property owner is Alireza Mirbagari and Shadi Zomarodi. I hope I said that correctly. And the applicant is Azada Baswer, and our project planner is Ms. Shupin. And I assume you have a staff report for us, Ms. Shupin.
I do, thank you. Before you tonight is a request to demolish an existing residence and attached garage and construct a new 2,882 square foot, one-story residence with an attached 436 square foot attached garage. The proposed residence complies with the maximum allowable floor area, setbacks, lot coverage, and height for the property. It would not be the largest home in the immediate neighborhood in terms of square footage or FAR. The project is being considered by the Planning Commission due to staff's concerns regarding the project's compatibility with the immediate neighborhood and compliance with the residential design guidelines as outlined in the consulting architect's report. The consulting architect's report, which is included as Exhibit 5, identified several issues with the project that were inconsistent with the design guidelines, and in response to this provided 6 recommendations, in addition to 2 differing approaches for design revisions to provide a more traditional roof form. As detailed in the staff report and in the applicant's response memorandum included as Exhibit 6, 2 modifications to the design were made in response to the consulting architect's report, with the applicant providing justification for the remaining outstanding recommendations that were not incorporated into the revised design. Based on the analysis provided in the staff report, staff is recommending denial of the architecture and site application. This concludes staff's presentation, but we are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shupin. Before I proceed, I neglected to ask if any commissioners have any disclosures, and Commissioner Thomas does.
Thank you. I need to recuse myself from this item on the agenda because I live within the radius of this property.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll see you for item 3. And may I also see a show of hands from commissioners who've been able to visit the subject property? Very good. Okay, and so then I will go back to see if any members of the commission have questions for staff. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So then now we will open the public hearing and we will turn to the applicant, and the applicant has up to 5 minutes to address the commission. And this does include any members of the applicant's team.
All right, Ali, we have allowed you to speak. You have up to 5 minutes.
Great. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thanks. My name is Ali, and my wife Shadi is also here tonight. We moved to Los Gatos a little over a year and a half ago, but we have lived in San Jose before that for over 20 years. We always love Los Gatos as our ideal town with what the town has to offer. Our daughter loves Fisher's School so far. and we've had lovely neighbors here. So we are very happy, and we hope we can stay here for a very long time and hopefully retire here. Now, as part of that, we have considered a lot of feedback from the neighbors when we were considering to do this new design proposal, which we believe that it actually provides a good transition between the two homes that are next to us, one of which is a contemporary design and the other one is a modern design that was recently built. And we have spent a lot of time trying to come up with a minimalistic contemporary style that we think fits the neighborhood really well. As it was mentioned before, there are some comments from the consulting architect's report. I would like to go over some of those really quick. Yes, this page, perfect. The first item was about the entry leaves. As the architect has mentioned, the height matches the neighbors. We have done some visual cosmetic metal overhang on the garage that should hopefully help alleviate one of those concerns. If you could go page 3, please. On the window types on item number 2, we have gone ahead and complied with the recommendation. For number 3, there is a recommendation to add trims to the window. The design guidelines say if the windows are recessed 6 inches, we don't need the trims. We are proposing maximum of 2 inches of recess and hope that provides a good compromise to be considered. I have also included a few examples from different homes around us that have very similar design with those windows. Page 4, please. There's a comment about increasing all the overhangs on the roofs. We have gone ahead and complied with this one. Page 5, please. There is an item for adding a window next to the entry door. We talked to the planning team as well, didn't seem to be a big concern. We have explained why we think we don't need this because of what is behind this door and our plan. And number 6 is a comment about carrying the same material all around the house. We have explained why we think what we have now meets the design guidelines. If you go to page 6, please. I would like to comment on this recommended design. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we believe we have put a lot of effort to have a minimalistic design that fits the neighborhood. Like I mentioned, we think this provides a good transition between the two homes next to us. If you could go to page 8, please. Next page. Yes, I have included a map and just wanted to show that if you go slightly beyond the immediate neighborhood, there is a lot of homes around us that have very, very similar designs to what we are proposing. So I just wanted to mention that we are not trying to do anything extremely radical. This design is in the surrounding neighborhood, and we hope you can consider this in your decision. Page 9. I want to talk about the neighborhood outreach. We have put a lot of effort to talk to every single one of our neighbors in the immediate neighborhood as defined by the design guidelines. We were very pleased to find out all the neighbors that we talked to fully support us with the proposed plan. They are actually happy about this plan. They think that not only there is no major concerns, but they also think that this can actually improve the neighborhood overall. We have listed the name of the neighbors that we have talked to. These 5 neighbors are in the immediate neighborhood. I do want to mention that we have talked to even more neighbors beyond this, and we have many of the neighbors, we have handed out printouts of the plans to them. We have invited them to our house. We have walked them through the story poles that were installed so that they have a very clear plan of what the house is going to look like. And there was no major concerns raised to us. And all these neighbors have also offered to provide their written approval also if it's needed. So I really hope the town can consider our efforts here to see if we can get your approval for this proposed plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And I'd like to find out if any commissioners have any questions for the applicant at this time. You will have another opportunity after the public comment period. Okay, it doesn't look like any commissioners have any questions at this time. So I'd like to open this item for public comment. So this would be an opportunity for any members of the public to speak on this item, and you would have up to 3 minutes. So if you would like to speak on this item, please do raise your hand.
If we have anyone who is not part of the applicant's team who wishes to speak on this item, project on Benedict Lane, please raise your hand now. I'm not seeing any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, and so then we will go back to the applicant and give the applicant an additional 3 minutes to speak to the commission if you so desire.
I don't have anything in addition to add. Just wanted to emphasize again on our efforts. We have tried to stay with the design guidelines to make sure the design fits well with the neighborhood. And I hope you should consider our efforts and the feedback that we have received from the neighbors. That's all.
Okay, thank you for that. And I will offer the commissioners another opportunity to ask any questions of the applicant. And this would be the last opportunity to speak to the applicant. Commissioner Jano.
Thank you. I do have a few questions, but I'd like to start with the response to the consulting architect, item number 1. You talked about adding some detail over the garage, but it's not clear to me in the materials what that detail is that would help to reduce the mass of the garage that the consulting architect is pointing out. Can you describe that? Or better yet, if you've got any graphics that would help us understand where that detail is, I would very much appreciate seeing that.
Sure. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I think I put a small comment in the description. It's going to be a metal overhang. And we submitted a picture of it in one of the revised plans, I believe. So it will be a metal overhang at the widest space on top of the garage, basically, that we hope will help with the visual.
All right, so I'm looking at your plan A-02.01, and what I'm seeing looks like a horizontal bar of some sort that doesn't
Correct.
quite span the full width of the garage. Is that the detail you're referring to?
Yeah, it's a horizontal metal bar, exactly. And we are open to any suggestions if you would like us to change the width or the shape of that in any form, if it helps.
I have at least another question or two, if I may.
Go ahead, Commissioner Jano.
Thank you. How would you describe the architectural style of your proposed home?
So I think we call it contemporary style with a minimalistic designs. I don't know exactly what to name it specifically. Our architect is also on the call, I believe, but I would say it's a contemporary style with a minimalistic design that we have tried to keep it simple, basically.
So when the consulting architect reflects that it appears to be, I'm not using the exact words, but a pared down Eichler style, is that consistent with what you have in mind, or are you thinking along a different line?
Again, I'm not familiar with the style that he has mentioned. We believe this whole time that we are doing a simple contemporary style on our site. Okay,
and one last question, please. The consulting architect is concerned about the height of the garage and that massing. You've suggested putting a horizontal metal bar. It looks to me like that bar is flat, so it doesn't have any projection. It's hard to tell from this drawing. My question, and in your response, you mentioned that the reason for the height of the garage was intended to cover the angled roof behind the garage. My question is there a reason why you didn't bring that angled roof over the garage so that you've got your separated split roof as you have? But did you give any consideration to bringing that roof line forward so you don't have that block of garage height? And in fact, the garage height would come down somewhat. Could you answer that question, please?
Sure. Yes, we did consider it, but as far as the look, just the pure look of the design, we really prefer to have the flat top on the garage to be seen from outside. So that's why we tried to come up with this height to actually hide the roof behind it, if possible.
The roof line behind it is in my view anyway, very consistent with the design style. Would you give any consideration to reducing the height of the flat top garage down below the fascia of the roof line behind so it is visible?
I really hope we don't have to do that. The reason is we have spent a lot of time trying to come up with the good proportions on the other side of the roof and versus the garage top. So we really hope we can keep it flat as it's seen on the plan right now.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you for your questions, Commissioner Janoff. And I will go to Vice Chair Barnett.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a number of questions also, if I may be permitted to ask them in sequence, but appreciate
Please go ahead.
I did not see a response to the consulting architect's recommendation to lower the height of the entry and roof area to be more in scale with the occupants and the proposed architectural style. And it seemed that in your response, you were only referring to the garage mass and the residence height. So my question is whether you have a specific response on the architect's recommendation as to the height of the entry.
No specific response. I personally couldn't find anything specific in the design guidelines that limits us to have a lower height in the door. Again, just purely because of the looks, we would like to keep it at that height if possible.
Okay, thank you. And next, you've not agreed to comply with the consultant's recommendation based on the residential design guideline 3.7.4 that there be wood trim around the windows or a recess of 6 inches. And you mentioned an agreement to do 2 inches as a compromise. Is there a reason why you wouldn't agree to go to the full 6 inches?
Again, we think 6 inches is a little too much just because there could be, I don't know, a lot of maybe birds or things like that outside, or it just provides a lot of unnecessary space on the window, I think. And as I mentioned in the response, we also found many homes around us that were recently remodeled or built that don't have frames and don't have recess, some of them even at all. Not even close to 6 inches. So I hope the 2 inches that we are proposing can be considered as a compromise. I mean, we can do maybe a little more up to 3 inches if that's acceptable. But 6 inches seems a little too excessive for us.
Okay, I appreciate your comments on that. I didn't understand your objection about the translucent window that was recommended by the architect. You mentioned that there's a closet on the inside, but I didn't understand how that might impede the use of the translucent window.
Sure. So 2 comments there. So one is, this is really not an objection. This was more of an explanation. Yes, there will be a closet, and we didn't think having a window on the closet will be nice. The other aspect was we are planning to do some plants on the other side once the house is done. So even if there was a window there, it could be covered by the plant possibly. But even this one, I think we have some flexibility, and if you believe that alleviates some of the concerns, we will be open to adding a window if that's necessary.
Thank you. And it's not sure I read the plans completely, but are you saying that the translucent window would give on directly to the closet side?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then my last question is, no, I'm sorry, I have 2 more. There was a recommendation from Mr. Cannon that the roof form be changed, as was mentioned by Commissioner Janoff, to a hip or single gable size. And I was wondering why you were opposed to that change, which he felt was important to be consistent with the residential homes in the vicinity.
Again, that's a pure personal preference on the look of the house. I believe on our site, there is no technical reasons behind it. We really think, as I have documented, there are several homes around us, not in the immediate neighborhood, but maybe 1 street behind us or 2 streets behind us that have similar type of roofs. And we have spoken to the neighbors about this as well, especially the 2 neighbors next to us. And they actually supported the design, and they think it provides a good transition between the 2 homes as well. So we hope that can be considered as is for approval. Okay,
and then I have one final question, if I might. When you talked to the neighborhoods and did your outreach, did you suggest that they send letters into the planning commission or staff?
No, unfortunately, I did not. But they did all offer to me that if I need something in writing, they will be open to provide that. So if you believe that helps, I can definitely reach out to them and ask either to directly send it to you, or I can provide that for you.
Okay, thank you. And I went one twist on that question, which is, did you contact all 9 neighbors in the immediate vicinity?
Yes, with the exception of one house that seems to be a rental. I could not get a hold of the owner on that side. And then one side on our home behind the backyard, there are office buildings. So when you say 9, I'm trying to count to make sure I have spoken to all of them. I believe that should cover all the immediate neighborhood neighbors.
All right, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thank you for your questions, Vice Chair Barnett. And looks like Commissioner Janoff has some additional questions.
I did want to ask the applicant about the stone treatment that the consulting architect also mentions as not being within the consistent with the residential design guidelines. And I'm confused by your response where you talk about the materials being in plane or not in plane. And I think the design guidelines says that a change of materials will happen on an inside corner. So the only inside corner that I can see in your plan, if I'm not reading it, if I'm reading it correctly, is the indentation in your front elevation for the front door. And so according to the design guidelines, the change in materials would be recommended within that alcove of the front door. You've got a large panel of stone on the front that doesn't seem to be associated with a change in plane. I see a straight line on the drawing, and the same with the treatment on the rear elevation. It's the same. It's in line with it's in plane with that entire line of your building. Could you comment on how you interpreted the consulting architect's concerns? It seems that you're disagreeing that they are in fact in plane, when it seems to me from the drawings it's clear that they are.
Sure. So I explained to you what I understood, and I hope I didn't misunderstand the comments. So the first one, there is a comment about carrying the same type of material all over the home, basically. And I have explained that we do have this type of a stone both in the front and in the back. So that's the first portion that I think we are meeting the guideline as recommended. The second one is about, I thought the picture that he had included is only referring to the back side of the house and not the front. On that back side, he is saying basically a change of material in the same plane as a stucco is not consistent with the guidelines. And I've tried to explain that this stone will not be the same plane as the stucco, and basically it will be sticking out, and there will be a level change between the stucco and the stone on the back side.
So what you're saying is that the stone treatment creates a plane change, and therefore,
correct.
And then could you comment about the consulting architecture's comments regarding the wood treatment that's generally above the front entry?
I'm trying to go back to the report to see what that comment was exactly. I thought I had covered it.
It's the use of materials in only one, use of a different material in only one elevation of your proposed design, rather than carrying the treatment on other elevations for consistency.
Oh, I see. So on the roof shown in the front of the house, I assume he's talking about continuing that all the way to the end of the roof. Is that correct?
I think what I'm reading the consulting architect say, and perhaps staff can comment, the use of the wood trim, his concern doesn't seem to be that the original proposal was covering half of that roughly triangular shape versus all of it, but the concern is that the materials are not used on any other elevation of the house.
So as far as extending it to the end of the roof, I think we'll be okay, and that's not a problem. I'm not sure if I'm clear on the elevation comment portion of it. I mean, it's gonna carry over on that top roof section in the front of the house. So I'm not sure what elevation we are referring to.
In the design guidelines, generally it says when there's a material change or something that's added to the structure, it's to be carried forward on all sides of the structure so it doesn't look like it's just stuck onto the front. And I think that's what the consulting architect is referring to. And if you look at I'm looking at your design renderings, and it looks like you've got this stone decorative element on the front and on the back. The wood trim is only on the front. Would it be possible to carry it around to the back to create a consistency of design?
If that's needed, I think we can go back and take a look. I think we might be open to it depending on what we can fit in. Is it possible to give us a little time on that to see if we can do that?
Well, I think you've indicated that you might be open to it, and I don't know that we need more time. I'll just close my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, unmute myself. Staff, yeah, I saw Ms. Shupin had her hand up, and then now Ms. Armour, and then also the applicant's architect has their hands up. So but since we closed the question, we probably don't have them speak. So maybe you could help me with that. So.
Chair, through the chair, thank you. I have allowed the architect to speak since we are currently asking questions of the applicant, and they are part of the applicant team. If they wanted to provide some answers to some of the questions that have been asked, or if there are additional questions, they could help provide those answers if you wish.
Very good. I think that's a good idea. So let's have the architect speak to some of the questions that came up from Commissioner Janoff and Vice Chair Bard.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah, hi, how are you? Okay, actually, I think the address means that mention all of the design process, but the thing regarding the material that we add, the wood material, based on the material that we add means that we continue the material in the facade, in the front elevation, that we continue this one. But if you think that if we can have, and it means that the material in the back of the house that is about continuously that we can have in the back, we have some space that we can add the material in the back as well. Or maybe we can work with them, is that me and Alireza and Shadi can work to each other. Maybe we can remove the wood in the front as well, if you think that is better. Only my concern about the wood material that you mentioned, because we continue the wood in the front, and especially in the front and in the top of the entry, that we have the continuous material here. And regarding another question regarding the height of the entry, you mentioned that we have some, so I think that you asked about this. This one is not too high, it's only 10 feet height. Means that is about the regular door is 8 feet or maybe 9 feet, and the height of the trim above the entry is only 10 feet. I only want to clear these two comments that I think you need to be clear here.
Okay, and then Commissioner Janoff, who is asking the question about the wood for sure, would like to respond.
Thank you. Just to clarify, could you please tell the commission the precise height of the door and how that compares to a typical entry door?
Sure. The entry is about, the height of the entry is 9 feet. And if you see that this one exactly on top of the entry, maybe that's about the bottom of this element is 9 feet or 6 inches or 10 feet.
Just to clarify, the door itself is 9 feet?
Yes.
Or the door is 9 feet tall? And how tall is a typical entry door in a typical residential neighborhood?
Residential is between means that is regular is 8 feet or 9 feet these days, that usually the people use the 9 feet as well. But means that the very typical is 8 feet. 8 feet or 8 feet and 6 inches is very typical these days.
All right, and if I may, just one more question. This
ahead.
relates back to Vice Chair Barnett's question about adding the translucent light panels to the right of the door as we're looking at the front elevation. My question is, on many of the contemporary designs or mid-century or whatever, the alcove where the door is that's where a color change or a material change occurs, rather than putting a slab of stone kind of arbitrarily on the front. Could you comment on whether that was considered, and if not, why not?
Yeah, to be honest, we consider about this one, but because we only have some, means that because it's about too close to the door, and then we have a coat closet under this side. That's the reason that we can't fit some fixed window or transom here. But I means that we consider about this item because we want to have a more light inside the door, inside the entry, especially the foyer. That's the reason that maybe we adjust this one and remove the coat closet and put somewhere else, and we can add some transom windows here as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Janoff. Do any commissioners have any questions for the applicant or the applicant's architect before we close the public hearing? Okay, I don't see that there's any other questions. So I'm going to close the public hearing. And now I will turn to the planning commissioners and ask if you have any additional questions for staff or would wish to comment on the application, and then ultimately to make a motion. Vice Chair Barnett.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the staff's statement that the proposed house is compliant with all of the zoning regulations, including building coverage, parking, and height. And I don't have a problem with the FAR, although it's close to the maximum, and also with the square footage, which is large, but it's not that it would be the second largest in the neighborhood. But I do have concerns about a number of items. The consulting architect found that the design is not compatible with the residential design guidelines, which is a conclusion that I agree with. For the particular residential design guidelines sections 3.1, 3.2.2, 3.7.4, and 4.2.1, which generally require the architectural style to be consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. I note that the applicant did not conform with the consulting architect's recommendation to lower the entry, did not revise the plans to fully comply with the residential design guidelines concerning the window trim or depth as an alternative, and did not revise the plans to the roof style being a hip or gable form that was recommended by the architect. Those are my major comments. I'm prepared to make a motion at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Let's remember to unmute myself. Thank you for that, Vice Chair. And we still have several commissioners that have questions or comments. I'll start with Commissioner Tabana.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my my comments short as I don't have much of a voice right now, but I think I am on the other side of the spectrum here in terms of this house and this application here tonight. After looking through everything and looking at the architectural design and actually going to the site, looking left and looking right when I'm looking at the house, I do think it would fit in to the neighborhood just fine. So I have no issues with neighborhood compatibility, as a matter of fact. I think it'll complement actually both of the remodeled houses quite nicely. So with that said, I don't have any issues with neighborhood compatibility, and that's why it has been brought before us here tonight. So I will be in full support, if the commission wills, to forward this project on. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tabana. And now Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. You know, I'm a little bit on the fence, but I just wanted to say that I truly appreciate looking at a project that, a proposed project that is a one-story home in a one-story neighborhood. That's not typically what we see. I appreciate the effort to keep the one-story. That ultimately for me is more fitting with neighborhood compatibility than the architectural style, and a style in a neighborhood where we've got a lot of different kinds of homes. This contemporary style didn't trouble me. And the fact that, well, let's not call it a fact because that's not an evidence, as Vice Chair Barnett has said, that the lack of neighborhoods, the lack of neighbors here objecting to the project would indicate that there's neighborhood support for the project. So I think that's also a good sign. I think that with all due respect to the consulting architect, I thought that his recommendation for changed roof forms really didn't complement the house. And if it's a truly contemporary house, not an Eichler, I mean, those look like Eichler style to me, particularly the large gable, front gable. If that's not what the applicant is going for, then I'm not sure that that's a complementary style of roof for what they have intended, even though it might, having more of a traditional pitch might be complementary to the neighborhood. It just doesn't fit to me with the house as designed. Having said that, I think that the design guideline concerns regarding the repetition of materials and the height of the entry are minor problems for me. I would like to see the height of the entry reduced to something more consistent with the design guidelines. And lastly, and I do appreciate if the stone decorative treatment is to be kept with the wood treatment, I would appreciate seeing a repetition at least of those both on the opposite side. You can't do it on the sides because you don't have the gables to work with. But I would like to see that. And then last, I don't understand the metal treatment that was inserted over the garage. It seems to me to be too low to serve as the kind of reduction of that blocky element over the garage door. I don't have a solution, and it just doesn't seem, perhaps if it were raised, I don't know. But that, I don't think that the applicant adequately addressed that concern of the consulting architect.
And thank you for that very thorough analysis of the project. I will turn to Commissioner Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. I'll first begin by noting that I agree with Commissioner Devana that it seems to me that there's no common theme in this neighborhood. There seems to be a nice sampling of different architectural styles in here. And contemporary, I think, works well in this neighborhood, given its immediately adjacent neighbors. I think it'd be a fine fit. I'll also note, as others have, that it's nice to see that an applicant as before is not trying to maximize the use of height and push the parameters of what is permitted in building. Los Gatos, we're retaining a single-story structure there. That being said, I'll be the first to confess that it's not in technical compliance with the residential design guidelines, but I find most of the variances relatively minor. My largest concern, again, is the garage area, the space between the top of the garage door and the roof line creates a problem, and I'm hoping for a more elegant response than we've seen here tonight. But that being said, it seems to me that this is a project which I think, even though I may have made some different design choices, can probably, in my mind, go forward largely as it's presented to us. And then I just throw kind of one off the cuff remark. Since we're out of compliance in this particular structure with residential design guidelines, it seems to me that those guidelines probably were created not with this building in mind, not with the style in mind, but rather with other typical Los Gatos buildings in mind. And so I think we're going to keep running into problems the more we see this type of style. And so is the solution to update the design guidelines to incorporate Eichler or contemporary style? Maybe that's the solution, but I think we have to make room in the community for these types and styles of buildings. And it may either be through the variance process or through amending what our guidelines state.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Commissioner Raspy. And I will weigh in as well. I concur with Commissioner Janop that I'm very happy to see a project that is in compliance with all of our standards. and also a one-story project because it's very unusual that we even see one stories. Although the people are very happy to purchase them and have them in neighborhoods, but we don't very often see that. I find it I found it troubling that the applicant was going so far off of the consulting architect's guidelines. It's not typical that when the consulting architect makes recommendations that he takes such a strong stance that it's not in compliance with our guidelines. So I would concur that this project is not in compliance with the guidelines. However, when you look at the total package, I do think that some of the concerns are relatively minor relative to this, the supportability of this overall project. What I would hope for is that we could make a motion where there would be some sort of compromise position. I think changing the roof form is unnecessary, but I think there's some other things that the applicant could do and should do to bring it closer to the residential guidelines. And there may be a date relative to Commissioner Raspi's comments when we were doing the review of the 2040 general plan. I think everybody realized that at some point we do need to relook at our residential guidelines, but the reason that we have them is to preserve our neighborhoods and keep in style of the neighborhoods that we do have in Los Gatos. So in general, I'm in support of the project, but I would like to see a few more efforts made to come closer to the residential guidelines. So then I will see if there's any commissioners that would like to make a motion or make any additional comments. Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess without specific guidance to the applicant or to staff, that's kind of like a, so I'm curious which residential design guidelines the other commissioners would like to see. I can understand the question about the window. They have recessed the windows, and I hear the concern with more than two or 3 inches to go to 6. And so, but I haven't heard that that's an area to take a look at. Anyway, I would be willing to make a motion to approve the project, but have it go back to staff so that the applicant will work with staff to get some of the design aspects closer to the residential design guidelines. I would just hate to do that without giving specifics about which particular ones. Like, is it the windows? Is it? I think we're all homing in on the garage roof line, so that's clearly an area. But I think if we make the motion to approve, we need to give something more specific to the applicant so that they can work with staff to come into greater compliance.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Janoff. So we'll see if we can get there in terms of more specifics that would resonate with the majority of the commission. Commissioner Raspi. You're on mute.
Thanks, Chair. Further to Commissioner Janoff's question, I think I would have 3 areas I would recommend changing. The area above the garage door, I would lower the front door to 8 foot, and I would either remove the wood design feature that it occurs above the front window, or I would carry it around to the back side so that it matches on 2 sides. Those would be my 3 recommended changes.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Raspi. Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I would support those 3 changes, except to say that I would like to see the wood treatment continued along the back. When I look at the 2 designs that the applicant has offered, the contrast of the dark metal trim, the wood trim, and the white, I'm not sure what color is proposed for the body of the house, but I think having that extra wooden detail does warm things and make it more interesting. So I prefer to see it continued rather than deleted. But I otherwise agree with the changes as suggested.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Janoff. Commissioner Raspi.
Just wanted to know, I'll join then in Commissioner Janoff's revised comments as to the 3 changes.
Okay, and I do like the suggestions as well, Commissioner Tavana.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add, after hearing this, in reviewing this project, I do think a lot of these choices are personal decisions for homeowners, which I think we have to keep in mind here. And what the consulting architect, and we have to keep in mind that it is a consulting architect. These are, the language used in some of these responses are consider adding. So I think we need to keep that in perspective here when we're making these recommendations. So 9-foot door versus a 8-foot door. I think that's a personal choice. I don't think that is an egregious ask, if that's what they want to have for their dream home, if you will. So I think we should be careful in the specific recommendations and keep some of those options open for the homeowners who will be building this home and ultimately living there.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Tavana. Are there any more comments, or are we ready for a motion? Vice Chair Barnett.
There we go. Although I seem to be in the minority in connection with the thinking of the commission here, I did want to make a point that a number of the comps that were provided by the applicant were not in the immediate neighborhood. They were behind in the next block and whatnot. So from my perspective, that's telling in terms of non-compliance with the neighborhood character.
Okay, thank you for that perspective as well. So I'm going to suggest that it would, after Ms. Armour makes a comment.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to ask, based on the discussion we've had so far, whether there could be some additional clarification on what direction you're looking for on the garage. I think the other two components that were listed of the 8-foot entry, reducing it to 8 feet, and the wood that's over the front door being continued on the rear, that those are things that staff could implement, but that we would look for more specifics in terms of the garage, modifications to the garage.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Armour. And so I'm going to go back to Commissioner Janoff. I think best to see if you had an idea of, what they could do more specifically, because we know that it seems like the majority of the commission doesn't feel that the ban that's there now is going to be meeting the requirement from the architect.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the consulting architect was concerned with sort of that large block of structure above the garage door being sort of out of, I haven't got his direct language in front of me. I think that together with staff, the applicant has several options. I wouldn't mind a decorative detail like the metal band if it made sense, perhaps for higher at, but just to break up that block a little bit more. Alternatively, I suggested that the garage roof be reduced so that we do see that rear angled roof. I think that is still consistent with the style, or bring that angled roof forward. So we've got more of a double peak, or more of a peak, but it's offset as their design indicates. Those would be suggestions that I could make. The third one, or the second or the third, where we can see that roof line, may be more consistent with the consulting architect's interest in having a full roof line, or not having a flat topped roof being so prominent. Does that help staff, and do other commissioners concur?
Staff, do you feel like that gives you some more direction? I mean, we have to be careful as planning commissioners not to get too far into design. But does that give you some more specific, if that is the will of the commission, because I do have to preface it with that because we haven't taken a vote yet.
Yes, I would say that does help clarify, giving some specific options rather than just general direction to reduce. Got it.
Okay. So are there any commissioners that are ready to make a motion? And, if we can't get the motion to carry, we can have a second motion. So. Commissioner Raspy.
I'll give it a try, Chair.
Okay.
I move to approve the request for demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence on property zoned R-8:1 located at 15602 Benedict Lane, APN 424-22-008, in conformance with the plans provided to the Planning Commission this evening with 3 changes. That is, first, reducing the height of the front entrance door to 8 feet. Second, carrying the wood design feature above the front window into the rear of the premises. And 3, creating a design feature above the garage door to break up the facade, or alternatively, otherwise reconfiguring the roof line of the garage to reduce the overall massing of the garage.
Very good. And does that, in conjunction with the, can you make the findings in Exhibit 2, or I don't remember what exhibit is.
And together with the findings that the project is categorically exempt from CEQA, that the project meets the objective standards of Chapter 29 of the Town Code, and as required for compliance with the residential design guidelines, except as otherwise set forth herein.
Okay, and then also the terms and conditions that are
incorporating the terms and conditions provided in our packet this evening.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you.
Is there a second for the motion? Commissioner Jana.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Are there any commissioners that would like to comment before I call the question? Okay, I'm not seeing, Commissioner Tabana.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to quickly add that I won't be supporting this motion. I don't unfortunately agree with the specific direction that Commissioner Raspy provided in his motion. I don't think some of the specific direction, while I agree with it, I do not agree with it, so I'll be voting no for this, but I do support the project overall. I just want to make that noted.
All right, thank you for that, Commissioner Tabana. Okay, any other commissioners that want to comment before I call the question? Okay, I will go ahead and call the question, and I will start with Commissioner Tabana.
No.
Okay, Commissioner Raspy.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
No.
And I vote yes. So the motion passes 3-2. And I will ask staff if there are any appeal rights for this action by the commission.
Yes, thank you. The decision of the commission can be appealed to town council by any interested person as defined by Town Code Section 2910-020 within 10 days and on forms available online with fees paid. Final deadline is 4 p.m. on the 10th day.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that in mind, we will go ahead and move on to the third item on the agenda. And that is, we are going to be reviewing the proposed draft ordinance for SB 9. And I will, and the action requested from the commission is to make a recommendation to town council, and who will ultimately make the deciding action on this. Ms. Armour.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to give Commissioner Thomas a moment to rejoin us.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, welcome back, Commissioner Thomas. The item 30 is consider amendments to Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the town code regarding permanent regulations to comply with the requirements of Senate Bill 9, Town Code Amendment Application A-22-002, location townwide, and our applicant is the town of Los Gatos. So I will turn to staff to give us a staff report on behalf of the town.
Yes, thank you and good evening. Before you tonight is the draft permanent ordinance to implement the requirements of Senate Bill 9. SB 9 went into effect on January 1st, 2022 and requires ministerial approval of certain housing development projects and lot splits on a single family zone parcel, with the intent to increase residential densities within single family neighborhoods across the state. The law allows for two new types of development activities that must be reviewed ministerial without any discretionary action or public input. First is a 2-unit housing development, which includes 2 homes on an eligible single-family residential parcel, and 2, an urban lot split, which is a one-time subdivision of an existing single-family residential parcel into 2 lots. When used, SB 9 will result in the potential creation of 4 dwelling units on an existing single-family zone parcel. In contrast, single-family zone parcels are currently permitted 3 units throughout the state, including a primary single-family dwelling, an accessory dwelling unit, and a junior accessory dwelling unit. SB 9 also outlines how jurisdictions may regulate SB 9 projects. Jurisdictions may only apply objective zoning, subdivision, and design standards to these projects, and these standards may not preclude the construction of up to 2 units of at least 800 square feet each. Jurisdictions can conduct objective design review, but may not have hearings for units that meet the state rules. On December 21st of last year, Town Council adopted an urgency ordinance to implement local objective standards for SB 9 applications. This urgency ordinance was extended and is valid to the end of the calendar year. The draft ordinance, provided as Exhibit 1 with the staff report, includes amendments to the urgency ordinance in response to state feedback, such as inclusion of HR zones, additional definitions and exclusion areas, new hillside standards, utility connection requirements, replacement housing, relationship with ADUs, and owner attestation statements. Details on each of these are provided in Section A of the staff report. Staff has also made edits to the draft ordinance in order to help clarify existing standards based on questions from the public that arose in this past year, which are described in detail in Section B of the report. Last week, the town hosted a community meeting to discuss developing a permanent SB 9 ordinance and foster public participation. The public comments gathered during this meeting, as well as all other written public comments that were submitted this year, are included in the packet and discussed in the staff report. Of the public comments received, there are 7 comments that were repeated, which are described in Section C of the report. Additional public comments were forwarded with today's desk item report. Staff looks for direction from the Planning Commission on the topics included in Section C and D of the staff report, as well as any questions or comments on the drafted ordinance. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for the thorough staff report. I would like to find out if any commissioners have any questions for staff before we go to public comments. And you will have another opportunity to ask questions after we take public comments. Okay, I don't see any commissioners raising their hands right now, so I will turn it to verbal communications and offer this as an opportunity for any members of the public to speak on this item. And I would like to preface that by saying we're very thankful that to all those who participated in the community meeting last week, as well as set in comments that were included in our staff report. And in addition, we got additional comments from the public in the desk item today. And now would be the opportunity to speak in verbal communications on this item, and you'll have up to 3 minutes. So please raise your hand if you would like to speak on this item.
So if anyone would like to speak on this item, Senate Bill 9 Permanent Ordinance, please raise your hand now. We'll give them just a moment in case anyone wishes to speak. All right. We've got a couple of people who are interested in speaking. First will be Lee Quintana. You should be able to unmute and speak now.
Okay. I think my most important question has to do with the fact that the ordinance contains a provision that once the lot split has occurred, that the construction on the lot can be processed as a discretionary project. I don't understand that, since it says, I believe the bill says that you need to use objective standards when implementing SB 9, and SB 9 covers both the lot split and 2-unit developments. By only requiring the lot split to be objective, or building up to 4 units on a parcel that is not a lot split, but allowing, once the lot split has taken place, to allow the resulting projects to be discretionary doesn't seem consistent with my understanding of the law. I have other questions, but I'm going to reserve them until I see the report that comes out for the council.
Thank you for your question, or for your comments. I wanted to find out if any commissioners have questions for Ms. Quintana. I don't see any hands raised. Staff, I mean, in terms of responding to the comments, I mean, we're just going to proceed as we normally do in a hearing and not directly address them. But I do have a question on her comment for staff.
Yeah, that is correct, though if the comments and questions from the public bring up questions for the commissioners, staff is happy to provide clarification.
Okay, I will hold off on that for now, and we'll ask if there's anyone else that would like to speak on this item.
Yes, Tony Jeans, you may go ahead.
Yes. Would it be possible to show the very last page on the public comments? I would like to talk to it.
Yeah, just a moment. Let me see if we can pull that up.
While that's being pulled up, I'd just like to say that what I'd like to do is show you the dilemma that I have when I am asked by clients to consider a lot split on their property. And I would like to, I'd like you to consider one change to the existing draft ordinance. Okay, if you could make that a little larger. I don't know if it's possible. I guess we can just pull it up on the screen. Okay, so what you're seeing there is a lot on the left-hand side. The same lot is on the right. And it's a 12,800 square foot lot. I just picked a lot that was 80 feet by 160 feet. A typical lot that you might find in an R110 neighborhood. And the way I have to split that at the moment, if a client comes to me and says, could you split this lot for me and give me 60% for my main house on the front and split a lot at the rear of 40% that I could sell? So what I have to do at the moment is, first of all, I do a calculation of 40% of the lot size, and 40% of 12,800 is 5,120. That is what I have to create at 40%. The existing ordinance requires me to have a 20-foot wide right-of-way to the back lot on the left-hand side that is shown in the purple color, and it is counted as part of the 5,120 square feet. So when you take the 5120 square feet, you can see what a small piece of property you end up at the back, because the flagpole, the panhandle, whatever you want to call it, is 20 feet wide, and it has to be part of the 40%. I don't believe that that is a property that you want to create and subsequently have houses designed for. I think it's a disaster waiting to happen. And I would ask you to change it to the way every other jurisdiction has it, and go to the picture on the right-hand side, which is you split it 60-40. That is the line through the middle. You are allowed an easement to the back lot, and SB 9 specifically requires the town to give you either street frontage for the property or provide a means of access to the street, which every other jurisdiction, Montecito, Saratoga, Santa Clara, San Jose, have all interpreted to mean an easement. Furthermore, the width of that easement only needs to be wide enough for a fire truck ingress-egress easement to access the rear lot for safety. 20 feet just happens to be what the current town code is, and they haven't changed it. So what you have is a really, really difficult situation. Also, the 20-foot width requirement means that it is incredibly difficult on most lots, unless they're very large, to not demolish the house, because it tends to go closer to the side property lines than 20 feet. So I would like you to look at changing that to the way every other jurisdiction does it, which is allow an easement to the back parcel and treat it that way. I guess my 3 minutes are up. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments. And I would note that you made multiple comments through the process, and we really appreciate that, including the drawings as well. And it looks like Commissioner Janoff has a question for you.
Thank you. Just briefly, Mr. Jeans, you indicate that every other jurisdiction has used the 12 to 15 foot width. My question is that something that they have done in conjunction with their SB 9 ordinance or with a different ordinance? Is this their response to SB 9? And could you be specific when you say every other, are they using 12 or are they using 15, or is it a mix?
Okay. In every case, as I see it, it is a specific response to SB 9 to implement it according to the terms of the literal terms of the law, which I believe requires the town to allow it. The choice of width varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some it is not defined. Some it just says sufficient for fire access, ingress, egress. The city of San Jose says anywhere between 12 and 15 feet, either as a fee title, ownership to the rear lot, or as an easement. The city of Saratoga does not define the width, but it allows an easement. So you have a wide range of options, but I think that if you were to put a footage on it, 12 to 15 feet is good, because the fire access requirement to a property is 12 feet wide. So if you provide a minimum of 12 feet, you're okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that answered the question. I just wanted to clarify, because you had sent in multiple documents. I have a couple of questions. First of all, this particular issue, you were asking for multiple things, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear about this. One is that that you feel that the 20 feet is too wide, and it sounds like you're neutral to whether it's 12 or 15. It just should be in that range. And then secondly, you are opposed to counting the driveway, the access as part of the square footage of either parcel. And by doing an easement, that would solve that problem. Is that the right way to look at it? What you're asking for?
I think my primary concern is that an easement should be allowed. If you allow an easement, you could choose to, I don't think you should, but you could choose to take that square footage off the front lot. I don't think you should. I think an easement is an easement. I think it gives the simplest way to do a 60-40 split and end up with reasonable lots so that you're not cramping the design of either house on the front or the back. I think if you go away from 20 feet fee frontage, which is what the town has in its code now, I think there's no rational basis for taking away that corridor from either lot. We're dealing with relatively small lots. I don't think it is beneficial. So I think the main thing is allow an easement as an option instead of requiring it to be a 20-foot wide fee frontage.
Okay, thank you. That clears up my question. Are there any other commissioners that have questions for Mr. Jeans? I don't see any other hands raised. So I'd like to ask if any other members of the public would like to speak on this item.
If anyone else would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand now. We'll give them just a moment in case there is anyone else who would like to share their thoughts on this, but I'm not seeing any more hands raised, Chair.
Oh, we do now.
All right, David, you should be able to unmute and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm talking, yeah. So I'd like to just comment on two things. The first is, of course, just to begin of course, as we all know, the point of this is not to make everyone happy. The point of this is to provide orderly rollout of the state law. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Some of the provisions that don't make sense, for instance, Tony brought up a good example, and who would, even if the ordinance goes through like this and it is required that you eat into the front lot, and it's not an easement, then surely nobody would divide the lot that way. Well, this is attractive enough for some homeowners that they will divide the lot that way, and you will get these non-optimal solutions, non-optimal results, just with people trying to follow the letter of the law so that they can get what they see as a perceived benefit from this ministerial process in terms of their time and money. So I think with that in mind, it makes sense in the couple of points I'm about to comment on. It makes sense to actually provide the fewest restrictions possible within reason for this orderly rollout of state law, because the more restrictions there are, the more sort of non-optimal results you'll get when people are trying to, they're attracted towards trying to follow this ordinance, but they find a funny way around it that really no one's happy with. They're not happy with the planners are not happy with, and perhaps the neighbors are not happy with. So if it fails on any, if a proposed project fails on any one point in this Senate bill, local ordinance, sorry, it becomes ineligible. So some of the ways we might want it to fail is if they're trying to create a very large house, well, that fails because there's a square footage limit, and we don't necessarily want anyone to build anything with this law. On the other hand, or if they're trying to build closer than 4 foot to the property line, of course, that is not eligible. But it can also fail in other ways that are not intended, like the one that Tony has pointed out. Another way I'd just point out is, for instance, with urban lot split, lot lines need to be right angles to the street. That's not practical. Not every lot in Los Gatos can be divided with a lot line that's right angles to the street or radial to a curve. Consider the irregularly shaped lots, or if what Tony is saying is implemented by the Planning Commission, meaning that this becomes an easement and not actually a part of the rear parcel, then that lot line, which Tony drew horizontal, would not be parallel to the street. And so I would worry that implementing any rule in this that cannot be followed, it's simply impossible for every lot in Los Gatos to follow, is a violation of state law. That making lot lines need to be at right angles to the street, that's not always possible. Another example is a minimum public frontage of, I think, 20 feet on a public road. There are many houses there and lots that are not on a public road or on a private road. So it's not clear how they comply. Without further clarification, or perhaps with just reduced restriction. For instance, if this minimum public frontage requirement was deleted from the text, I wonder if that would solve this particular problem. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and also the written comments that you sent in as well as part of our packet. I'd like to ask if any commissioners have any questions for David. Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, I'd also like to thank you for your written submission to the commission in your in the attachment to the staff report that we received as a desk item, I believe. Would it satisfy your concerns if an easement was used for access rather than a fee simple grant? And also if the requirement of right angles was deleted or a radial was deleted?
Can you still hear me? Okay, that would satisfy that aspect. I only had 3 minutes, so I didn't talk to some of the architectural points and concerns. I think I'm out of time, but that certainly satisfies this particular point that I raised tonight. Yes.
All right, thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions for David? Okay, I don't see any additional hands up, so I will open it up to anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this item. And this is the only opportunity to speak on this item because I will be closing the public hearing and we will be having a discussion amongst the commissioners of our recommendations.
So one more opportunity, if anyone wishes to speak on this item, share thoughts or questions that have come up on Senate Bill 9 implementation. I'm not seeing any additional hands raised.
Okay, very good. And I will say that and remind everyone that is watching from the public that there will be other opportunities to comment on this item. You can send your written comments into staff following this meeting. When the town council hears this item, you'll have an opportunity to send written comments as well as speak at their meeting when they're actually making the deciding vote on going forward with this SB 9 ordinance. So there will be multiple opportunities to speak going forward. That being said, I will close public comments and we will go back to the commission to Commissioner Rasmussen.
Thanks, Chair. I'm curious to hear from staff as to their thoughts on the easement issue and then the perpendicular right angle issue for streets and why we're currently apparently the outlier on it, and if there's a rationale that we're using a different approach.
All right, looks like our town attorney has a comment for you.
So I'll address the easement question first. The proposed ordinance referenced the fee interest because the thought was that we would be consistent with what's required for other flag lots in town. But I do think that the speakers have raised a good issue with regard to the language of SB 9. They're correct that SB 9 simply requires that both parcels have access to right-of-way, and they are correct that access could be provided via either the fee or the easement interest. So that is a valid comment. And then with regard to the line being parallel to the right-of-way, SB 9 does require that agencies ministerially approve lots that meet a set of criteria. And none of those enumerated criteria include that the lot line is parallel to the right of way. However, there's a subsequent section of SB 9 that says a local agency may impose objective subdivision standards that do not conflict with this section. So it's kind of interesting because the legislation is setting forth the criteria under which a lot split is to be approved, yet it's also giving agencies the ability to impose objective subdivision standards. And, you know, there's really a question as to whether an extra requirement conflicts with the enumerated requirements in the statute. So I probably don't have a definitive answer on that second issue regarding the parallel line, but perhaps Jennifer has a thought on that.
Yes, thank you, Town Attorney. I would just add the context behind, or kind of the idea behind including that provision. The goal there really was just to keep things relatively orderly, trying to find a objective standard, something that could be put in place to try and make sure that any subdivision is done in a relatively simple, straightforward, orderly way. But as with many of the objective standards that have been included in here, if that is something that Planning Commission recommends modifying, that's definitely one that could be removed or modified.
Thanks. That answers my question. And Chair, one follow-up question, as long as I've got the lawyer close by. Assuming that there would be a use of easements, would we envision that we would leave the terms of the easement up to the developer, for instance, who's responsible for maintenance and payment, or would that be something we'd have to dictate as part of our SB 9 town code regulations?
What I would recommend is that maintenance, and one commissioner asked about requiring that the parties agree that attorney's fees will be paid in the event of a dispute. My recommendation would be that terms like that be negotiated between the two property owners. But I do think that it would make sense for the town to impose as a condition of approval that access always has to be maintained so that the access can't be blocked.
And I would add to that as staff does review the map, we do send it over to Parks and Public Works for a preliminary review as well. And generally they would be looking to make sure that there is an easement shown both for access and for any utilities to get to the rear lot.
Great. Thanks to you both for answering those questions.
Okay. And before I go to Commissioner Danoff or anyone else, I did want to say that what we decided in our prep meeting for this meeting is to go through the issues that are outlined in the staff report, starting on page 6 for this item, which is page 124 in the packet. They mentioned C and D relative to public comments. I was going to bring up each and every one of those issues and get some resolution on that. But since we are on the subject of the and it's fresh on our minds about the easement as well as the access, maybe we should take that issue first and see if we can get a recommendation that gels with the commission that we can make to town council. So why don't we continue this particular discussion and see whether other comments and suggestions we have from the commission. Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I did have a question about the minimum frontage comments, but if we're going to get to those as we proceed, then I'll hold off on that.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the 20 feet, but there's also the minimum frontage for any portion to the street, right?
Right. And I was just curious what the town attorney might interpret along on that particular issue.
Is this a good time?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead since it was brought up. So
Okay. The only requirements that I see in SB9 are the 40-60% difference in that one lot can't be smaller than 1,200. I'm not recalling a portion of SB9 that addresses minimum street frontage.
Okay, and I think the minimum street frontage is in our code elsewhere, so it's not driven by SB9. My only comment about, so I would be in favor of the developer having the choice of a fee, whatever that's called, or an easement. You know, different properties are shaped differently. The example that Mr. Jeans provided is a long lot. You could have a wide lot. You could have an oddly shaped lot. You just don't have always the same structure. So I would allow that to be a choice that the developer made, that the developer would make in the determination of the lot split. Well, at least I would be in favor of that. And same issue with regard to the right angles. And Ms. Armour, you talked about an organized split, and that probably means something to you. I can imagine what that means, but we also have a lot of, I think what you're saying is you don't want, something jury-rigged with a lot of angles and strange shapes in order to get to some percentage that isn't really usable. There's probably a better way to say that than the right angles. I know, for instance, in my neighborhood, we don't have any right angles. I mean, none of the plots have right angles. They have angles, but so I think that moving away from the right angle terminology is a good thing, but talking about simplified shapes or something would maybe make more sense in trying to convey the idea that we want something organized.
And Commissioner Janoff, since you have the floor, could you also comment on your thoughts about the width of the access? Because it's
sure.
size 20.
Yeah, I think, well, as I said, I think that, as I recall from previous planning commission meetings, we talked about flag lots. I think the 20-foot access is related to the flag lot ordinance that we have. I could be mistaken, but I would be in favor of reducing that for sure. I think the argument that it creates an potentially unworkable remaining shape for the structures that's a good argument. And you're talking about, between 5 and 8 feet, that makes a big difference. And so I would say, if the fire department says 12-foot minimum, I think 12-foot minimum is fine. And the only comment I would say to that is elsewhere we say 12 to 18, about, I can't remember what it is, a driveway or something. And in the hillsides, it says 12, but no maximum. So whatever we use, if we're using a number or a range, we should be consistent with that in SB9 and also in the other guidelines, even if that means making some change to our code.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Commissioner Tabana.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess I'm a little bit confused in terms of the square footage requirements on the parcels with respect to non-conforming conditions. So in section, I guess on page 12 of the draft ordinance, number 5, it says non-conforming conditions. The town shall not require as a condition of approval the correction of non-conforming zone conditions. However, no new non-conforming conditions may result from the urban lot split, other than interior, side, and rear setbacks as specified in table 1.2. So my question is, are we creating many non-conforming lots by splitting these lots into smaller pieces, if you will? Because across town, we're, at least in my neighborhood, every lot's non-conforming. So what controls do we have in place to prevent non-conforming lots or small flag lots, or if you will? So just a general question, maybe surface level.
Staff, could you respond relative to what we have in the ordinance right now?
Yes, thank you for the question. And Ms. Armour, if there's anything else to add afterwards, please feel free. Via SB9, we are required to allow a 1,200 square foot minimum lot size. So that will, the term non-conforming, we're no longer looking at the zoning requirements for minimum lot size. So generally in R1 8 zone, 8,000 square foot is minimum lot size. SB9 does come in and say the minimum lot size we can requires 1,200, so it is a lot smaller than what we're used to.
And
So
what I
basically,
can,
go ahead.
what I can add to that is that language about the town shall not require correction of non-conforming zoning conditions. That's actually directly from the state law. That we, as part of an application, if there's a non-conforming situation, we can't make them fix that as a condition of an SB9 unit or subdivision. There clearly are a number of components here where it is allowed under these regulations where it otherwise would not be allowed. Minimum lot size is an obvious example where a subdivision wouldn't be allowed through the standard process because the lot isn't double the minimum lot size, but SB9 would allow it.
Okay, Commissioner Tabana, does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't need to re-raise my hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, just to keep things on track for the same, for the same subject that we're on, because there will be an opportunity to bring up anything that you want. I do want to make sure we answer all the stuff questions. So I would like to find out from any other commissioners if you have comments on any of the things that have come up so far, which is the fee or easement discussion, the width of the access for these flag lots, whether or not it could be less than what's in the code, or if we should revise the underlying code as well, and the issue about the right angles. And I just wanted to clarify with staff, the issue of counting the access in the square footage is a separate issue, or does that get resolved if we use an easement?
Thank you for that question. We would use the current standard practice, which is the area that is in the easement as he showed it. What was shown in that image was that the rear parcel, the new rear parcel, would gain access to the street through an easement over the front parcel. And so the area that easement goes over is still part of the property, the front property, and so would still count as part of the area of the front property. And so, for example, the size of the house that would be allowed on that front property would be based on the full lot size. It would not be reduced based on that flagpole area because it's an easement. Whereas the standard practice right now for flag lots, if there is a flagpole that is dedicated, that's part of the land for the rear lot, that area is actually removed from the lot size before you calculate the allowed floor area. That's a net lot size. And so that, I think, is part of the component of what they were talking about with the benefits of having an easement being used. I also did want to provide a little more clarification to the question of the perpendicular property lines. We have, since we have had to expand the application of this ordinance to include the hillside lots, it is correct. We've dealt with more irregularly shaped lots. The perpendicular, I think, was primarily focused on rectangular parcels, which is a lot of what we have in the flatlands. It does have a provision that if you have a curved front lot line, like at the end of a cul-de-sac, that it would be a radial. So it's kind of perpendicular to the curve. And we have successfully used that. For example, on a hillside lot that came in recently, they have kind of a quarter, if you think of a pie slice, that's a quarter of a pizza. And they wanted to divide that in half. They basically cut that into two slices, so that you've got and if the road is on the curved side of the crust side of that pizza, then the line is cutting it into two similar sized pieces. And so the line was perpendicular to the curve of that lot. And so it made, it is possible, even with irregular lots, to find a way to use that requirement and make it function for that site. But that is just additional context for your discussion.
Can I ask a question to respond to that, to make sure I'm understanding? What is the underlying reason for, since it's not in the state's SB9 ordinance, why are we including this in there? What are we worried would happen if we don't have that in there?
It really, as I said, was intended to not have oddly shaped, complex, kind of gerrymandered shapes, to have something in there to provide guidance as to how to do a standard kind of layout for the sites. That really was the goal. If it feels to Planning Commission that it's overly restrictive, then it's not something that we have to have in there.
Okay, I was just asking the question, but thank you for that, and we'll see what the commissioners think about that. And just another question for staff in terms of process that I should have asked yesterday. When we've done like the general plan and some other things, we voted on sections of things. So but we have a lot of individual issues that are on the list to go through. So what would be the best thing? Just, do you want us to try and vote on everything, or to see if we have consensus, and then hopefully we can put together a motion at the end?
I think it would be fine if you wanted to do it either way. If somebody wants to keep track of the consensus items and make a final motion at the end of what additional changes should be made, that would work. But it also would be equally fine if you wanted to make kind of interim motions of changes that are agreed upon. I will also defer to the town attorney if she has anything to add.
I agree with those suggestions.
Okay, all right. So we're flexible. I mean, we are making only a recommendation. It's not a it's not a deciding vote that will go into law. Okay. Vice Chair Barnett.
I have a question for the town attorney, which is whether you can articulate any benefits to using a fee simple access road versus having an easement. I mean, we talk about both, but I don't know if there would be a situation where the fee would be preferred.
The only benefit that came to mind for me was consistency with what the town requires for other flag lots. But other than that, I can't think of a benefit of one versus the other.
And so I'm going to, ask a follow-up kind of on Vice Chair's question, which is, do we see this as problematic? I mean, since this is for specific kinds of projects, is it problematic that we have things in the ordinance that are different than what's in our zoning code?
No. And I would say that it's not a problem if you think of the regulations that were adopted for accessory dwelling units. There are situations there, for example, the setbacks that are allowed for those accessory dwelling units, the floor area that's allowed for those additional for accessory dwelling units, and the fact that they can be a second story on a detached structure. Those are all things that otherwise wouldn't be allowed, but are allowed for that specific type of use or process.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Okay, so the issues that we're talking about right now, and I would like to hear more from some of the other commissioners, is this issue about the fee simple or easement or both, which is certainly an option for how to provide access. The issue of the width of the access and how it's counted, and then the issue of the right angles. Commissioner Respi.
Thank you, Chair. So my thoughts are on the easement issue. I think we should make available to the developer that are either or, and let's give them the most amount of flexibility, because as we know in this town, every lot is different. And I think adding more flexibility also adds to supporting the general purpose of SB 9. With the only caveat to that is, as town council notes, if we are going to do an easement, at a minimum, the holder of the, or rather the owner of the property, I guess the user of the easement should be responsible for the maintenance of the easement, so that at least there's always access, and the no property can block another from use of that easement at any given time. Let's see, on the radial versus perpendicular line issue, again, I would counsel flexibility because it seems to me that we have probably more than half this town is non-conforming in its shapes and sizes. And so again, whatever allows us the greatest benefit of use, let's use that standard. So I don't think we should have a hard and fast rule that it'd be 90% or any other. I think, in my view, more flexibility in that regard is better. And on the back to the easement issue, who owns and holds that? I think it's whoever owns the land. That portion of the land should be allotted to their interests. That's my thinking.
Okay, very good. Oh, in the width of the access.
Oh, yeah, it seems to me that 20 is entirely too large. So I would be happy with any number between 12 and 15. It should probably be a standard number. And I would defer to experts on that one if there is a standard in the industry that's more. And again, I think the only issue is in the hillsides, they've recommended, I think it's an 18-foot because of fire reasons. Let's maintain that one. Because I think the fire department's already opined that they need a wider access on the hillsides.
Can staff clarify about the access in the hillsides? Is it 18 feet?
Thank you. The guideline says 12 feet for driveways in the hillsides.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thanks.
Okay. All right, good. Vice Chair Burnett.
I agree with Commissioner Raspy in terms of giving a developer the option to use a fee interest or an easement, but I think we need to keep in the requirement that in the case of the fee easement, that the lot size has to be considered without that fee interest. That's the way it's currently written.
Is that possible to if they use the fee simple structure to not count that as part of their, not you count it as a reduction of the square footage that they have available to them?
Just to ask for some clarification, what you're saying is if the rear lot included the flagpole, so they own that area rather than having that as an easement, access easement, that you are interested in having the rear lot being able to use the flagpole area in terms of calculating their maximum house size? Is that what you're wanting?
Well, I read the current draft of the ordinance. In the case of fee interest grant to establish the right-of-way to both parcels, that there would be a reduction in the minimum parcel size. Maybe I have that wrong.
So my understanding of the way that it's written so far, and Mr. Safdie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that when we are looking at the lot size for the rear parcel in terms of what maximum allowed floor area, we just calculate that rectangle in the rear. We do not include the purple area. I believe that's what we're talking about, or are you talking about the lot area in terms of the 40-60 split? I guess there are a couple different components here.
Well, my understanding from reading the ordinance, and perhaps I'm wrong, is that the fee grant as opposed to the easement would reduce the available square footage for the improvements, whether
That
it's
is
parcel 1 or parcel 2.
That is correct, because when it's fee, that is part of the lot area for the rear, but it doesn't count towards when they're calculating their maximum floor area. So that is correct. Whereas if it was an easement, then the entire parcel size is divided between the two and can be used towards that calculation. So my understanding then is what you're suggesting is that when the flagpole is fee rather than easement, that would not be excluded from the lot size of the rear parcel, the net lot size.
Correct.
Okay.
I think we've got it now.
I think I understand what you're suggesting, hopefully.
Okay.
So just to add on to this discussion, so the chart that you just had up for Mr. Deans, where he was showing that the back lot would only have half of what they thought they had because you're including the flag. That's not what our ordinance says. Is that what you're saying? Because I mean, counting it as part of the overall lot and then deciding that you could build less on account of it because of fire are, those are, dramatically different things that we would be worried about because you wouldn't be able to get the desired result.
I think part of what is causing some confusion in this situation, if you look at the first example that he provided, you can see that for parcel 2, there is the gross lot area, which includes the purple. And then there's the net lot area, which does not include the purple area. And the reason that there is a net lot area in this case is that the town's current regulations for flag lots say that when you calculate your floor area, it needs to be based on that net lot area, excluding the flag pole. So you still have the gross floor area that's the equal between these two examples, but because so much of that is for the 20-foot flag pole, it ends up very uneven in terms of net lot size that can be used for the purposes of calculating the house size.
Okay, well, so I'm going to say that, at least from my perspective, that's an undesirable result, because they're sharing that for access. And you shouldn't penalize them in terms of the square footage of the house they should build. So is there a way we can make it so that that's not the case?
I'll actually defer to Community Development Director Paulson to see if he has thoughts to add.
Thanks. Not to add more confusion to what's already seemingly confusing to folks here. The current code actually doesn't include the flag portion as part of the lot. So for meeting the minimum requirement, and as Ms. Armour mentioned, it also reduces the potential FAR. Obviously, the simplest way to deal with that is if someone chooses not to do a flag lot because the lot is small, as in Mr. Jean's instance. But you could have, much larger lots in the R120 or the HR, for instance, where that's not going to be as much of an issue. But I think the easement really cleans that up. Having the option, I think, is probably the best way to go. And that way, if they do run into an issue where it is significantly restricting the FAR, for instance, or impacting the lot at the rear because it reduces the net lot area by so much, then that easement really is going to be the provision that allows them to have the most flexibility.
Okay. Commissioner Tabana.
Thank you. Just a quick question for staff, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask this out loud actually tonight. Is there a minimum square foot size for the urban lot split in terms of applicability, in terms of how large a lot should be that's applicable?
Yeah, I can answer that one. There's two requirements. Neither of the two lots can be smaller than 1,200 square feet. And the ratio of the lots to one another needs to be 40-60. So you can't have one tiny lot and one huge lot.
So what you're saying is we can start with a 2,400 square foot lot divided by 2 to have two 1,200 square foot lots.
Yes.
And that's the requirement coming down from the state. We can't circumvent that anyway. Okay. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the 40-60 as well. So if the 40-60 made it that the lot was bigger than you described, and then their minimum lot size would go up for the 40, if the lot was big enough.
Got it. Yep.
Unless I misunderstood that, town attorney, I think it would be usurp the 1,200 square feet if it violated the 60/40.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I was just going to weigh in on what issues that we've been discussing so far. I would advocate for as much flexibility as possible to encourage production, as long as we're not going to create unintended consequences. So, and on the issue of the fee simple or the easement, I think we should offer both. And if the fee simple does result in a reduced square footage, I would want to make that go away if we can do that, because I think that it should be on a level playing field based on whether or not they choose one access form or another. And I also agree that we should have something very specific in there that there's no way that access can be denied to that second lot. So I would say that. And then on the issue of this width of the access, I think we should go with 12 feet. That's minimum required for fire. That's what we do in our hillsides. Whether or not we adjust the zoning code as a follow-up to this to reduce it from 20 is a subject that could be considered. But I think we want to make it as, make it flexibility while still holding to our standards. And then on the issue of the right angles, I would vote for more flexibility. I mean, I wouldn't imagine, I can't imagine what could go wrong, and there might be something that could go wrong, but since it's not in the SB 9 ordinance from the state or the law from the state, we should probably just not discuss it here, because I think we would find that there's issues where it wouldn't apply, and we wouldn't want to throw them in a discretionary review. Do any others have comments on these issues so far before we move on? Okay. All right. I'm going to go back to page 6 of 9 in the staff report, and the issues that's titled proposed changes from that resulted from the public comment. So we've been discussing some of that already, but there are some other items in here that we haven't discussed. And the first one that they have is applicable zones. And the issue is that it has to be a single family residential zone, but it might not be called that per se. So what staff was asking is we could consider allowing SB 9 permits with other zoning designations. Possibilities could include multifamily zones, or in any zone where the existing use is a single family use. So I was curious from staff's perspective, what other zones, would that be, specifically? Or is there too many to discuss?
I'm happy to jump in, and Mr. Safdie or Ms. Armour have any other comments. This is a comment we received from a property that's in the RM 512. And so they were built as detached condos. So they're detached single family homes in the multifamily zone, but they're under condo ownership. And so there's an interest from at least one party who I've spoken to be allowed to subdivide using SB 9. And we have those instances in the RM 512, probably not so much in the RM 1220, although I can think of at least one. Those are the two that really came to mind. We also have non-conforming uses in where that's single family homes in commercial zones. I think that might be a bridge too far, but ultimately we wanted to at least get some input from the Planning Commission to see if there was any interest. We're not obligated to allow that, but as with some of the other discussions this evening, it's kind of that balance of, do we want to be to the letter of the law, or do you want to allow a little more flexibility? So that's really the question, whether they should be allowed in any other zones or none other than what we have currently proposed.
Okay, let me just ask one clarifying question before I go to Mr. Safdie. The law from the state basically excludes the historic district, and we have at least one person that has commented that they would and I'm understanding that some people have asked to get off the historic inventory on account of this SB9 so that they could do this kind of stuff. But since the state has said historic properties are not part of SB9, if we wanted to go there, I don't know that we do, but if we wanted to go there, are we allowed to be more lenient than the state on that issue of historic?
Yes,
Yeah,
because
County Attorney.
SB9 says that cities can be more expansive than SB9 if they choose to.
Okay, so other zones, and it could include historic, even though, you know, we're protected by the state to not include historic if we want to go there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, staff wasn't intending including historic districts. The comment that you reference about other properties, as you all know, we have different levels of historic. So it may be a pre-1941 home, but it's not in the district. Those are some of the ones that we will probably see asking to be removed so that they may be able to take advantage of these new regulations. We don't envision going to opening up the historic districts, but of course that's something the Planning Commission can discuss if they feel that that's something.
I'm totally asking the question. So I wanted to ask about the condo example that you gave. So if they have a condo ownership and they did a lot split, what would happen with the land? I mean, they would take because the land is owned by the condo association, right? They would have their buildings. So would they just divide it amongst the individual condo owners? Like how would they handle the land and the access if they did a lot split on a condo?
Thank you. So Vice Chair Barnett or Council or Commissioner Raspy might have some additional comments, but technically the condos are just airspace. So they would have to undo the condo map and simultaneously record an urban lot split, which would give them the land. Currently, as you mentioned, there's a one lot and then there's two airspace condos that encompass their single family homes. So now they would each have a portion of the existing underlying lot rather than just airspace rights.
Okay, so Commissioner Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Paulson's essentially right. It's actually tough to envision how it's going to work mechanically. And so, Chair, you raised the question with respect to applicable zones and how it's currently applicable to HR zones, and do we want to push that into other multifamily? And my thought as we're talking tonight, I'm all for as much flexibility as we can, but we're kind of venturing into the unknown a little bit. And so my thinking is perhaps at our first cut at the SB9 implementation, perhaps we leave it to its current confines and not expand it into multifamily or condos, or certainly not commercial. And then let's get our feet under us a little bit. And if we have to come back and revisit that issue, we can always do that. But I think as a first cut, I would feel more comfortable limiting its scope to what it's currently drafted to be.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Raspy. And oh, by the way, that was my initial reaction as well, reading through this. But we were asked by staff to consider this, but I think it's still pretty new, and I agree that I think a lot of studies should be done, or understanding of where this could go to add a bunch of other zones, because we're taking on the hillsides as it is. Vice Chair Barnett. You're unmute.
There we go. I think in the case of a condo association where every owner has an undivided share or percentage in the project as whole, the buildings, the land, it would probably take 100% of the owners and the lenders to approve a lot split under SB 9. So I would agree with Commissioner Raspy that we hold off on that as not being practical or certainly deserving of further investigation. And in the case of planned development forms of common interest developments where everyone owns their own home, and the land under it, but the association owns the common area. In that case, there's usually very little common area space. And this would, building additional buildings or buildings on that would certainly impair that open space. So I'm generally against it, but I think the council could look at it and see if they would come to the same conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other thoughts on increasing or adding other applicable zones at this point with our first permanent ordinance? Commissioner Tavana.
I would just say I would highly advise against it for town council. Thank you.
Okay, and you know, as was said, this is a recommendation to council. So you know, I think you know what we're asked to do is to discuss it and consider the issues around it. And what I'm hearing is don't go there on adding the more applicable zones, since we're adding on the hillsides and having to digest that, and let's see how it goes, because we can always do more later. Okay, let's move on to the grading limitation. You probably saw in the comments that a lot of people, we have the grading limitations from the hillsides. A lot of people express objections to the 50 cubic yard grading limit, and there's also the cut and fill table that was included from the hillside design guidelines. And so the issue that was brought up, there are people that want to get rid of it entirely. And then there are some that would want a carve out for the driveway, or the staff also suggested the light well. So thoughts on that? Keep it in there, modify it. Commissioner Thomas.
I have a question for staff about grading and I guess grading limitations and SB 9, if people take this route, and like how CEQA comes into this whole picture. And if something would have, like if CEQA, yeah, anyway, okay, thank you.
So I'll start with the CEQA question. SB 9 applications are explicitly exempt from CEQA. So there wouldn't be any CEQA review under this. If somebody came in for a new 2-unit development, they were building 2 units, and they complied with the regulations that we had, then it would go through as an exempt project under CEQA. If you could clarify what other questions you had, I could describe what the current regulations are for grading and how it would work with SB 9, if that would be helpful, or if there's something else you wanted clarified.
Thank you. I think that I just wanted to clarify that I think that sometimes we can, pass ordinances and come up with some regulations surrounding them, knowing that if projects are going to have to abide by CEQA, then we have some safety with regards to environmental issues. So I think that, this is not an area that I am, like grading is not necessarily an area that I am an expert on. And I see Commissioner Janoff raised her hand, but I think that I'm just wondering, I don't want grading to be limiting, because we want people to be able to use SB 9 in a productive way to create more housing that we need in town. But I also don't want us to be creating any like major environmental consequences associated with it incidentally. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Janoff.
I had a couple of questions on this section, but before, I wanted to ask that we sort of left the question of historic districts unanswered, and I would be an advocate of exempting historic districts from SB 9, just in case that was something that we needed to cover. But back to the grading. So a couple of questions. My understanding is that if the grading is in excess of the 50 cubic yard net, then there's a grading permit required. That there was an implication from the public that would cause the whole thing to be taken out of the SB 9 queue and move it into the discretionary queue. That's not my understanding, but if staff could comment about whether that is in fact what would happen. Is this one of those gotchas that if you're, over the 50, you're no longer eligible for SB9?
Thank you for the question. So as currently drafted, and this is also the same with the urgency ordinance, if you were triggering more than 50 cubic yards, again, we're not talking about excavation for the main house, but grading associated with the driveway or the yards, you would not be able to use an SB9 2-unit development. That doesn't mean you can't use any of the provisions of SB9. You could still go through the urban lot split. You could still theoretically get a discretionary permit for the grading permit and then proceed with the administrative 2-unit development process. It's not saying that you can't use anything with SB9, but if grading over 50 cubic yards is triggered, you would need that separate discretionary application as one part of the process.
So if they had that, then they could still continue with the SB9 2-unit. Okay. So I'm generally, I'm generally in favor of keeping the grading pretty low because we've seen a lot of pretty crazy examples of people digging a whole ton of dirt, not to be literal, but so I'd be inclined to keep it low and let that grading permit be triggered, and then they can still go back into the SB9 lane if they get that grading permit. But I had a question too about the light wells. As written in the staff report, it seems to be the opposite of what we would want. It says additional clarification could be added to state light wells that do not exceed the size required by the building code would also be considered excavation. And it seems to me that we would do just the opposite. Light wells that do exceed the size required by building codes would be considered excavation. If it's within the envelope that the building code specifies, it seems to me that shouldn't be counted as excavation.
And that is correct, that currently we don't count light wells as excavation, but we have seen situations where a light well becomes a below grade patio, or it becomes a cutout around the entire back perimeter of an existing building. And so one thought was to try and have this be an objective standard, that we could tie the limitation that it's exempt from the grading calculation, but only when it is just the minimum required for light and access by the building code.
Okay, so what you're stating is opposite of what the sentence reads, and it's what I would advocate, that if the light well is within the envelope required by the building code, it does not count as excavation. Anything beyond that, yeah, we've seen all kinds of excessive grading to create patios and other things in various requests, and I think once I would even be inclined to say once you go outside the building code, it all counts. Not, you can't say, okay, well, up to the building code doesn't count and anything beyond that does count. I say if it's within, it doesn't count, and if it's over, it all counts. So yeah, I don't know if that's excessive, but it just seems to me that it flirts with a lot of, well, it's within this, but it's not there kind of arguments, and so that's my thinking.
And just to clarify, sorry.
Okay. Oh, no, go ahead.
The reason it was written that way, excavation is actually exempt from grading permit. So the light well, we were saying, would count as excavation for the house and therefore not trigger the 50 cubic yard.
Okay, that's a nuance. I would maybe write that differently. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to weigh in and agree with Commissioner Janoff. In the years I've been on the planning commission, people buy properties in the hillside and then they have big slopes and all that stuff, and they wish it wasn't that way. They want it to be flat. And so they want to go put in a 20-foot retaining wall and excavate thousands of yards, of soil. We've seen some of these things, and, sometimes they've even come to us for code compliance issues. So I mean, the temptation is way too high for people to try and make the hillsides not be hillsides, so that they can be fully usable by them for their property, which, is understandable in terms of idea, but, we should be trying to guard our hillsides and keep them the way they are. So I would be personally in favor allowing the driveway to, and the minimum required for light wells in the house, but not the rest, to make it completely flat for, their purposes. So that's, I would definitely not take it out. Vice Chair Barnett. Oh, you don't have any additional comments?
There we go. Sorry, my unmute wasn't working.
Okay.
The comment from the public was that additional grading should be allowed for driveways, fire access, and turnarounds. And I wonder if staff could give some idea of how often permits are pulled for that kind of additional grading.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Armour. I don't know if you have a specific number to chime in as well. Fairly often in the hillsides, especially with the new fire requirements for driveway widths, turnarounds. So it is fairly often that a grading permit is triggered just solely based on the fire department requirements.
I would agree.
We've seen a few in the last year, is my recollection, where the grading for the driveway was the thing that threw it over the 50 or the maximum cut and fill.
So my input would be that we perhaps submit a recommendation to the council to at least consider adding additional grading for those specific purposes without getting a permit.
Okay. Any other comments? So what I heard is I think there's the support is there for keeping the grading limitation in there, but having exemptions for the building is already in there, maybe to add the driveway, and then to make sure that the light well is limited to a light well. I think I captured that correctly. So does anyone see it differently than that? Okay. All right. So then we can move on. The next one is fire review, and it was about requesting Santa Clara County Fire Department be included in the review. This would not need to be included in the ordinance, but could be recommended as part of the implementation of the project review process. Staff, if you could clarify, I saw one comment from one of the architects or developers that was around that when they started going through the process, the fire came in later, and then that might have been the thing that threw it out of the ministerial process. So they were wanting them to be included earlier in the process, like at the beginning. Is that where this came from?
Yes, I believe that is correct, that we've had examples. We actually have a number of accessory dwelling unit examples in the hillsides where they submitted an application for an accessory dwelling unit. They received that permit, and then they came in for their building permit. And during the building permit review, there is review by Santa Clara County Fire Department. And at that time, they were told they needed to have a fire truck turnaround, for example, on the site because of the new dwelling unit. And that was either infeasible or caused additional problems. I believe we have an application in right now where they're going through the architecture and site review process because of site grading that's associated with an accessory dwelling unit. So there is a desire by some applicants to get early pre-review or review by fire during the accessory dwelling or during the SB9 application process. And what we tried to convey in our staff report is that if you had review by Santa Clara County Fire as part of an SB9 application, that causes some real problems in terms of timelines and cost. And so that is not something that we would recommend, but that we are happy to work with Santa Clara County Fire to see if there's a possibility of setting up some sort of pre-review. I believe at least one other agency in the area has as a requirement of the application submittal for one of these SB9 applications that they already have gone to Santa Clara County Fire or whatever the applicable fire district is for approval and have a letter saying that they can do this before the submittal is received. We would need to work further with the fire district before establishing the details of that review. Hopefully
So
that helps.
That helps. So what you're looking for is for the planning commission to say, is that a good idea or not?
We're bringing this up because this is an issue that has been brought up by the public, and we want to make sure that the planning commission has an opportunity to weigh in on it, but we would not recommend that it include any modification to the ordinance. Got it.
Okay. But it could be as part of the process in our recommendation to council that you ought to, you ought to or not ought to involve fire early to make it more streamlined and to increase the ministerial part of this process. Commissioner Jana.
Yeah, as I understand it, that makes a lot of sense to have that step earlier in the process than later. It's a whole lot less redo, and if we're trying to make this as streamlined as possible, I would be in favor of adding that as part of the implementation.
I think that makes a lot of sense as well. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, so consider that as a recommendation not to be in the ordinance, but as to be a part of the process from the Planning Commission. All right, the next one is windows. This was about the standards were originally included to minimize privacy impacts as state law limits setbacks to 4 feet on the internal and rear property lines. The draft ordinance amends the window standards to decreased restrictions so that all second stories within 10 feet from the side and rear property lines can have clear story windows and larger windows as needed for access. So, so some of the people were commenting that they wanted to just utilize the underlying zoning standards. So as it stands right now, though, it's based on the 10 feet. Is that right?
Sorry, if you don't mind clarifying 10 feet in terms of what exactly?
Well, because there's some movement in this area, why don't maybe you could recap what's in the draft ordinance right now so that we could, because people were complaining about that being too restrictive.
Gotcha, certainly. So currently in the draft ordinance, you need a 4-foot side and rear yard setback. You build a second story that then needs to step in 5 additional feet. So we're saying if you are a little bit beyond that, all second stories within 10 feet from the side and rear property lines can have both the clear story and the larger windows. What a lot of the members of the public were hoping to see is that if they meet the underlying zoning setbacks, for example, there's one specific gentleman who lives in the hillside zones. So if he incorporated a 20-foot side yard setback, would they still need to meet those clear story and minimum egress size requirements?
Okay. And what is staff's recommendation on this? I mean, what problem would it cause to use the underlying zoning versus what we have in there now?
So I can start off, and Ms. Armour, if you see any other additional issues, let me know. This was included originally just solely to protect privacy, because again, the setbacks are reduced so substantially. So we don't see any initial concerns with something like that. We would just be looking for recommendation from the Planning Commission to make that change.
And I would just add that.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair. I would just add that, for instance, in the R1D zone, the minimum side setback is 5 feet. So you could have, if you use just the underlying zoning, as some people are requesting, you could have a second story that's 5 feet from the property line with picture windows in it. But again, our recommendation currently carrying forward in a similar vein to the urgency ordinances to, if it's 10 feet or more, then you can have a little more freedom from a window size perspective.
Okay, because the setback is only 4 feet. So we're saying that you have to get up to 10 to do that. Okay, Commissioner Jana.
I think that's a good change. Thinking about what this is going to do to add in terms of density, changing it from the underlying zone to have that 10-foot, say if it's a 5-foot underlying zone, makes good sense to me. So I think this is a good change, and I'm in favor of it.
I wanted to just ask a question as far as the hillside, since we do have bigger setbacks in the hillsides. Does this make it harder for them? Because they're going to be more. Most of the lots are already more than 10 feet, anyways. Or are the setbacks going to be reduced to 4 feet for the hillside?
The setbacks would be reduced for 4 feet in the hillside. That is a standard requirement across all SB9 applicable zones.
Okay, all right. So then that makes sense. Any other thoughts on this? So basically, what the draft ordinance says now is that if you want more flexibility with the windows, you have to have 10 feet, and then automatically the setbacks for everybody, even including the hillsides, under SB9 applications will be 4 feet. So this would be to help ensure privacy. And do we want to make it less restrictive is the thing that we were asked by some of the architects. Vice Chair Barnett.
I don't see it making it least restrictive, but I'm kind of concerned, maybe staff can help me on this. I think the proposal was that if the underlying zoning requirements in terms of setbacks were met, that they could have the standard windows that are allowed by the code now. And they didn't want that changed by SB9. So maybe I could get some clarification on that. That would be appreciated.
I think you just said, though, that did I hear this wrong? That if it's 20 feet in the hillsides, it's not for SB9, it's going to be 4 feet.
That is correct. If you did a 2-unit development or an accessory dwelling unit, for that matter, in the hillsides, then the side and rear setbacks are only a 4-foot requirement. In a case where maybe there's a standard zoning setback of 5 feet, we would still have this requirement that the second story must be set back at least 10 feet from the property line before you could do a window that is greater than either clear story or the minimum that's required for egress. We need to have that minimum for egress allowance, but all other windows would have to be clear story unless you move the second story wall back so that it's more than 10 feet from that side or rear property line. If it's more than 10 feet, then, whether it's complying with the underlying zone setback or not, is not restricted.
So, and so if the issue is that, let's just take the hillsides, for example, was an issue, we can't revert to the underlying zoning for the hillsides because it's now 4 feet instead of 20. So I would say what you guys have put in there makes a lot of sense for anything that's part of SB9, since we can't use the underlying zoning for the hillsides. Unless I'm not hearing something right. So any other thoughts on this? So what I'm hearing by lack of disagreement is that we should stay with the language that's in the ordinance right now, that we shouldn't change it. Okay, all right, good. Okay, let's see. And then on the wrong page, 709, okay. Second story step back was the next issue. Comments are received regarding the second story step back requirement, requesting that this be removed for 2-story SB9 units that meet underlying zoning setbacks. The standard provides both a reduction in potential privacy impacts as well as preventing construction of walls that extend the full height of the new 2-story residence. So some of the architects were saying it's going to limit their design flexibility and whatnot. Commissioner Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly. It's section B5 of the, B5 of the proposed ordinance, which says all elevations of the second story of a two-story primary dwelling unit shall be recessed by 5 feet from the first story. So if I read that correctly, if a building has 4 walls or 4 sides, every side has to be recessed on the second floor. Is that correct?
That is correct, as currently drafted.
Okay. I can just envision that. I understand that has certain privacy benefits to the neighbors and everybody, but I can see it resulting in some kind of odd architectural choices if every wall has to be recessed. And so I'm curious if maybe there's a way to limit it to those that are exposed or create privacy concerns.
I would add that, as we stated in the staff report, it's both for the privacy as well as we often see comments from the consulting architect about big, blank, tall 2-story walls. Yep. Or the tall front of a building in terms of compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood.
Oh, absolutely. I agree that breaking up a facade with setbacks is in many cases desirable. It seems to be difficult to make it a requirement for all 4 sides of a building. But correct. Maybe I can't envision it correctly in my mind, perhaps.
It is similar to the discussion we had about objective standards previously. It's hard to have objective standards and envision, how to include those without going too far and causing odd architecture.
Agreed.
Can you remind us of what do we because we spent hours on the objective standards? Where do we finally come out on the recommendation for the objective standards on the step back?
I don't know if Mr. Safdie has specific memory on that, but I do believe we had step back requirements above the second story. So if you had a 3-story building, that was going to be required. But I think in some cases, it also was part of modifying the facade. So it might not have been for the entire length of that 3rd story. We are still in the process of taking the comments from the Planning Commission and putting it together in a revised document for Town Council.
Fair enough. I'm going to agree with Commissioner Raspy. I'm having trouble envisioning a scenario where they would step back, because most of the projects that we've seen here where they would step back the second story, it's not all 4 sides necessarily. It could be parts that are facing other things, or where they really need to break up the wall. I could see it as problematic to require it of 4 sides, but then I wouldn't want it to not be there because we don't want the big blank walls, and we've seen those in proposals as well. So that's why I was asking if what we ultimately decided, but the objective standards are for multifamily and this is for single family. So it sounds like there might not be a way to make this an objective standard if you it had to have a discretionary review just to decide what else is it facing and everything. I'm not sure about that. Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, you kind of get the image of a small block on top of a bigger block, and that kind of gets your design ethic stuck. And I'm not sure that necessarily would drive this, but my recommendation would be to see if other jurisdictions have a step back requirement. What's Monte Sereno doing? What's Saratoga doing? And if they have one that seems reasonable, great. And if they don't, then I would say if we want to, and I think it's a good idea to have a step back. I think it makes for more interesting design. But if we make it a requirement for, two sides where you have the closest proximity to a neighboring structure or something, I don't know, maybe not all 4 sides, so that there's some discretion about where you put that and taking into consideration the specific context. But I'd certainly want to see what other jurisdictions have tried.
Ms. Armour and then Commissioner Tawana.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to quickly answer the question that this was actually included based on the City of Campbell's interim ordinance. So this was something that was taken directly from what they were putting in place. We were definitely looking at other agencies and what they have included in their ordinance.
So we've already gone through this process, and so what we're doing wouldn't be different than what others are doing, is what you're saying.
That it was drawn from another example in the area. The other caution that I would share is that we are hoping to keep these regulations simple, so that it is a straightforward thing for applicants to come in with a proposal. And so getting too complex about proximity to other buildings or property lines can cause unintended consequences in that direction as well.
Okay, I had a thought on this, but I'm going to go to Commissioner Tabana and Commissioner Jano first. So.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly add that I agree with this second story step back. I do think this is an opportunity for us to shape how SB 9 projects are going to be seen in our town. And I think a second story step back, however that may look or may be feasible or not, will ultimately look better for these projects. So I would like to see this kept as is in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Tabata. Commissioner Jana.
Yeah, given that Campbell is establishing something similar, I feel more confident that we could keep this. If we did any other benchmarking to verify that other, more than just Campbell is including something along these lines, then that would be great if you've got time, but I'm comfortable leaving it as is.
Okay. I think now that I heard that, I am as well. Vice Chair Barnett.
Yeah, I agree. I think having an objective standard on this particular subject would be the least worst solution. The double box structures are really unattractive in my personal opinion. And I think we don't want to encourage that type of construction.
So you're saying to leave it as is or to change it?
As is, yes.
Yeah, as is. Okay, I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. Right. Okay, all right. Yeah, I started thinking about what we talked about with objective standards, and but that's not about the second story step back here is not about breaking up the facade. It's about privacy. So if it's about breaking up the facade, then there's a lot of other things you can do besides the step back, like we were talking about in the earlier hearing. So if it's really about protecting privacy and we're going into uncharted territory with having, a lot of properties closer together because they're splitting their lot or adding additional buildings on their lot, I'm okay with leaving it as is. Any other comments on this one? Okay, we only have a couple more to go through, but there might be other things that you want to bring up, in which case I'll do a check and see if we need to continue for the next meeting. Okay, size limit. Comments have been received in opposition to the 1,200 square foot size limitation for the first new SB 9 unit. The original urgency ordinance included the 1,200 square foot size limitation for any SB 9 unit versus the new one. When the urgency ordinance was extended, the council modified this to only apply to the first new unit. The 1,200 square foot size limitation is consistent with the maximum size of ADUs, and the second unit is allowed to use the remainder of the floor area allocated based on the lot's FAR. So there was an example, it was from a potential applicant or an actual applicant about, the way they saw it is they wanted to build a 2,400 square foot second building, and they had around 4,000 square foot, and they wouldn't be allowed to do this because the limit would be 1,200 square feet for the additional building. Commissioner Jana.
Yeah, I must say that this is really confusing to me. and I'll explain why. Throughout the ordinance, we're talking about primary units and then the second unit. And so I was really confused about, okay, well, what's primary? And if you can demo the existing, and then what's the primary and what's the first new unit? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we should be more clear in our terms. I suggested that we might add a definition for primary, because if primary is intended to mean the larger of the two, then that's one thing. But I'm under the understanding that you can have two primary units on a 2-unit lot split. So that's unclear to me. I understand the 1,200 square foot unit limit because that's consistent with the ADU policy, but I'm just wondering if we should just leave it at FAR and let the developer figure out whether they want a 3,000 square foot and a 1,200 square foot, or a 2,000 and I'm not sure that it makes sense to limit that. And I'm assuming that the first new unit means the existing stays and there's one new unit, and that's 1,200 square feet. But that whole terminology is very unclear to me, and I think I understand this pretty well. So anyway, I would think that we could do something different for the SB9s, and we could make slightly larger units, but stay within the FAR plus. I'm not sure if the plus 10% applies to this or not. So there's just a lot of confusion around these things for me.
Thank you for that. I had the same reaction. I actually, listening to the example that was in our written comments about if you are in the hillsides and you have 6,000, if you can go up to 6,000 square feet and you're not there with your current house, why couldn't you use the rest of your FAR for that? And I also am not 100% sure about how the 10% bonus applies to this, but to me, they ought to be able to use their build whatever is within the FAR for the property. I'm not sure why to limit it. And I understand that we did it for ADUs, but if you're talking about a second dwelling unit, I mean, the comment that was made, a lot of people couldn't live in a 1,200 square foot unit. Okay, Ms. Armour.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to offer some of the context based on the discussion with Town Council, which is where this requirement originated. And for exactly the reason that Commissioner Janoff was mentioning, we did actually add a new definition in the ordinance that lays out that a first residential unit means one of two housing units developed under a 2-unit housing development that can be an existing housing unit if it meets or is modified to meet the 1,200 square foot floor area limitation on first residential units. The way that I think of this requirement to try and envision how it works is that the idea is there's a goal that we heard from the Town Council to try and have one of the 2 units be affordable. And so affordable by design, by not letting it be too large. In addition to that, then they said because a 2-unit housing development application under SB9 you could submit an application on a vacant lot for a 2-unit housing development going through this ministerial process, but only propose a single housing unit. And so they wanted to make sure that if they're proposing only a single housing unit, that it be one that is affordable by design. If they chose to do 2, then they can actually make use of their full floor area. But by requiring it to be the first of the 2, then it ensures that one of them is the smaller unit and therefore affordable by design. In addition to that, they then did decide that because they are putting this limitation, they wanted to include the 10% additional floor area that is allowed for accessory dwelling units. One of the things that we have discovered over these last few months is that it is important for us to have additional language like we have for accessory dwelling units, that 10% is intended just for the use of that small unit. If you've got a large property, for example, say it's an acre-sized lot in the hillsides, the intent was not to allow a 10% of that full lot size. It really was meant to allow this smaller unit to be built, even if the existing house, used the full floor area that was currently allowed. Hopefully that is helpful in understanding what was behind this regulation when council put it in place.
Well, that helped a lot. I mean, because honestly, if people are going to build a 2,500 square foot house as a second unit, it's going to be worth several $1 million. So it's not going to be affordable based on current and the way things are currently going here. Commissioner Jana.
Wow, that was a great explanation and completely changes my mind. Okay, yeah, let's try to keep these as affordable as possible. And so keep that 1,200 square foot. I would just say that it might be, I don't know whether there's an opportunity for any preamble around the SB 29 ordinance introduction, but I think, that explanation about why the 1,200 is a really important one, at least for me, and maybe it's not important once we put it in place or town council approves it, then it'll be what it is. But I think it's important for people to understand what we're trying to achieve, and that in the way of more affordable housing. So yeah, I'm in favor of leaving it at 1,200. Thank you.
I also wanted to ask a clarifying question, and then I'll go to Vice Chair Burnett. So this was on another issue, is about the occupancy, but I see that as applicable to this situation where they were talking about, I go do a lot split, I sell the one lot, and then I want to build on the other. So then, is it open territory, or does that have to be 1,200 square feet?
So the way that that we look at something like that is that we're dealing with separate applications. So if they come in for an urban lot split, then we're just looking at the sizes of those two lots, making sure that it's meeting the 40-60 split, all of those requirements for the urban lot split. Once that urban lot split is complete and recorded, then you have two legal lots. Then, and this actually does get to one of the questions that was asked by the member of the public, then you have two legal lots. On those lots, you have a choice. Do you want to go through a discretionary process so that you can do a single family home that uses the full floor area that is allowed on that new lot size? Or do you choose to use the 2-unit housing development application, which is more limited? The first unit on that parcel would have to be 1,200 or less, but you could do 2 units at the same time and therefore use the full floor area.
So they could not go through this process, an urban lot split, and then build a single family home and take advantage of a ministerial review.
Not if they want it to be more than 1,200.
So 200 square feet.
However, if you think of a house with an attached accessory dwelling unit, as long as those were designed as 2 separate units, we don't say that one has to be in front of the other. And because of this 1,200 square foot limit, what we're considering the first single family unit is actually effectively the same as an accessory dwelling unit. So there are ways around it a little bit, but that they would need to meet some of these objective standards included in the SB 9 if they want the more limited process.
Okay, well, thanks for the clarification, Vice Chair Burnett.
Thank you. In the context that we're talking about, I'm confused by paragraph 9 on 7 of 14, where it says the minimum living area of a primary dwelling unit shall be 150 square feet, subject to the health and safety code.
So that's the minimum size for any dwelling unit. It can be larger than that, but we're not going to count it as a dwelling unit if it's only 100 square feet. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm trying to reconcile that with the $1,200 square feet limit.
So that is
more. Sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
I was going to say that the 1,200 is a maximum. The 150 is a minimum.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. All right. So other thoughts on this? I mean, right now, the current thinking, I mean, based on the commissioners have spoken, is to leave it at the additional unit, 1,200 square feet, for all the reasons that went into the original ordinance to make more affordable housing. So is there any thoughts to change it from that? Okay, I'm gonna say that's a leave it as is. And then the last one that's in section C is the frontage requirement. Comments are received regarding the minimum width required for the, oh no, we did this already. Okay, the 20 feet. Yep, we didn't have an additional comment, did we, about a lot frontage if it's not a flag lot? Or did we? I'm trying to remember. So
I believe we may have had a request that the lot frontage requirement be removed completely. It was often connected with a discussion of flag lot. Mr. Paulson, I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that.
I would just say with the discussion previously tonight, that really was tied to the 20 feet for a flag lot, which has already been decided. So now the new minimum width, I would say, would be, if you're doing a flag lot, it's 12 feet, but you also could have no frontage and do an easement. So I think that we can clarify that component and or remove it. We'll look at that prior to going to council.
okay, all right, that sounds good. Okay, all right. And was there anything else that we needed to consider? Let's see, you said in section D.
I think, Chair, in section D, you've talked about most of it except for the 16-foot height limitation in the HR zones, the 30% slope. And then the
Yep. Thank you. I just was pulling up the right page, and I highlighted it here. Okay, so there are a couple more things we need to talk about. So the 16-foot height limitation for HR zones, some people have complained about it because the way it goes in the hillside design guidelines is it's 25 feet unless you're visible, in which case it's 18 feet. But now, for sake of simplicity, it's 16 feet, period. So some people are saying that's not enough. So thoughts on that? Commissioner Jana.
Yeah, I mean, we've struggled so much in Planning Commission with these excessive heights, or what's visible, what isn't visible. I'm thinking that the 16-foot is perfectly reasonable, especially since it's in theory, it's a second unit on a property. So I think that's reasonable. Okay.
Commissioner Raspy.
Yeah, I would agree. And it seems to me that 16-foot allows two-story if you wanted to, it would with 8-foot plates. So I think it probably gives you all the height you're going to need if you use it wisely. So I think 16 seems like the right number to me.
Yeah. Well, and if, going back to kind of the discussion we just had on the 1,200 square feet, I mean, I'm sure there's some enterprising people that are thinking SB9 is for building mega houses, 2 on a lot. And so we have to remember the intent of SB9 was not to do that. It was to make, more housing, but affordable, in smaller units. So, okay. The next one is we adopted, as you read in the staff report, quite a number of things from the hillside design guidelines. And one of the things that we actually adjust the square footage available, but the 30% slope restriction for buildings in the HR zones. So what it's saying is if there's a 30% slope that you cannot do SB9. Let me make sure I understand that ordinance. So staff, could you clarify?
That is correct. Specifically to building sites, it would prohibit a new 2-unit development for being located in an area of the property where the slope is over 30%. And then, as you mentioned, that is to line it up with the hillside design guidelines, where that generally is a major exception or something that does require planning commission approval whenever they are going beyond that 30%.
And so a lot could have areas that are greater than 30% slope, as long as the proposed housing units are not located in those areas.
So if there's an LRDA and it's not 30% on that property, let's just say that the average slope of the property is 30%, but there's some parts of it that are reasonably flat, they can still do SB9.
Correct. We are
Even
with the 30. Yeah, the 30% is just the building site, not the whole property.
Okay. And we've had some submissions to Planning Commission where they wanted to build on a huge thing. And I think what you guys are trying to avoid is having to do all these calculations to figure out the usable square feet. So just keep it simple and have it be, if it's 30%, you can't build there. Is that right? I just am trying to make sure I understand the intent.
And reducing the grading involved. I mean,
Yeah.
right now, the regulations say that the building should not be located in areas where there is a 30% slope or greater. And so we're working just to be consistent with that. I see that Director Paulson has his camera on. He may have something to add.
Okay.
I'll wait for Vice Chair Barnett and then see if there's any additional. I think Ms. Armour covered it.
Okay, Vice Chair Barnett.
There was a comment from the public on this subject that the calculation of the 30% was ambiguous as to whether it would be an average, for example, and maybe we could tighten that up in the proposed ordinance.
We can definitely add that clarification.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw in a couple of the comments about, if they have to do all kinds of different calculations before they even start on the SB9 calculation, is it really a ministerial thing? So, but the idea of this for simplicity seems to make a lot of sense. Okay. Any other thoughts on the 30% slope? Okay, and then we already talked about the right angle requirement. Oh, there was the 3-foot finished floor height limitation. It was increased from 18 inches. Is that correct? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, so now it's 3 feet, and then some of the architects have said it's not enough for the hillsides because you're building on a slope plot and you would be burying part of the home or more than you'd want to. How did we come up with the 3 feet?
Similar to the 30%, that's also from the hillside design guidelines. It's one of the requirements that guidelines that encourages you to step the building with the slope as opposed to building a flat pad and going from.
Okay. Thoughts on whether or not to change this, or I don't think they were asking to eliminate it, or were they?
The question was, is 3 feet too limiting? So I'm not sure there was one specific recommendation, with a recommended number or removing it, but it was just to revisit it.
Okay, Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, if we've got a 3-foot requirement for the hillside guidelines, and this is the area that this is going to be problematic or not, it strikes me that we should be consistent. So 3 feet has been, I mean, we've had the 3-foot requirement for some time, yes, or is it new?
It's correct. It's been in the document, I believe, since its adoption.
So, if it's been working well enough in that sense that we haven't talked about needing to change it, then I would say that we could probably let the 3-foot stand.
I think my general thinking was the hillside design guidelines have served us very well since they were created in 2004. And I kudos to all the people that put those together because they've been very, very helpful in so many hearings that we've had. And so if the 3-foot has worked for us, I'd say porting that over along with some of the other requirements will serve us well as we, go into this SB9 territory without making it to on our assumption. I'm sure there will be exceptions, but you have to put a stake in the ground. Any other thoughts on this 3-foot? Okay, and I think we did the right angles. And then you got, then the rest of this says you got questions and you can answer the questions. Town attorney.
Thank you. In my notes, I unfortunately didn't write down where the commission landed on the right angle issue.
My sense of where we were is that we should not put the right angle limitation in there to give people more flexibility. And any commissioners speak up if I didn't get that right. Okay, so I didn't miss anything that was in your notes, I don't think. Because the other ones here were questions. Okay. So it is 10 o'clock, but I do want to see if there's more things that people are worried about, that we should continue this to another, to our next meeting. Or, and if there's a lot of stuff that we haven't covered, then we should continue. But if not, we can see if we feel like we've gone through enough to make a recommendation. Vice Chair Burnett.
One of the commentators suggested that we might want to have affordability requirements for the SB9 units. And I'm not sure where I stand on that, but since we're trying to mix low and medium and high income residences throughout the town, I think it might be worth discussion.
Our town attorney has her hand up.
I think there was some discussion on that previously, and it's my opinion that imposing an affordability requirement would be preempted by SB9. I don't think SB9 authorizes towns or cities to do that.
Director Paulson.
Yes, thank you. And to add on to that, because this obviously was an item of conversation throughout the urgency ordinance discussion through the town council, because our BMP requirements start at 5 units or more. If we wanted to do something, as Town Attorney Whelan mentioned, I think it was mentioned previously that we would probably likely have to do a nexus study to bring that number down, since we're only talking about a maximum of 4 units here. But appreciate that input.
Question for staff. I mean, could we do the same thing that we do with ADUs and say if they are willing to, we give them some kind of benefit if they sign a deed restriction on the additional property?
I do think that would be defensible.
Okay. Well, and I would also add, since I have worked on the last housing element and we're currently working on the current housing element, we tried to put affordability restrictions on the last housing element, and it came back from HCD, no, because what they want is stuff to get built. And then the secondary goal is the affordability thing. And my sense is they would view that as trying to preempt SB9 from being built by adding too many restrictions on it, even though it's counterintuitive to what you really actually want to have happen. It comes out that way when in terms of their thinking. So are there other thoughts on affordability restrictions? It sounds like we can't do it, so unless we offer a deed restriction. And what would be the benefit to the applicants that were willing to sign a deed restriction?
Is that a question for me?
For staff.
Okay.
Well, unless there's a legal benefit.
I mean, I'm just going to throw out some ideas. I mean, maybe the permit is processed faster. Maybe there's different, more lenient FAR rules or more lenient height rules. Those are the thoughts that spring to mind for me.
Or reduced fees.
That's what I recollect from the ADUs. I mean, I don't know the current state of it, but the fees seem to be an issue because they do have to pay fees for SB9, right? Even though it's ministerial, it's still, the fees aren't any less than we have for other things, or are they?
The fees currently align approximately with an accessory dwelling unit application. but then they do still need to pay the fees for building permit. If it's an urban lot split, they still need to pay the fees to do the recordation of the map.
Okay. Well, so, I mean, in terms of a recommendation from us, I mean, I would say, I don't know if the other commissioners think that it might be worth exploring whether or not to offer a deed restriction and what benefits we could throw in with it. But I think it would require some more thought than the time that we have right now. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. Are there other things that commissioners saw in the comments from the public, including all the architects, that we need to discuss that we haven't? I think staff did a great job of pulling these out and putting them in the staff report, and then they had the benefit of the community meeting a week ago. So we have all that input as well. I feel like we're probably in pretty good shape, but I just want to make sure we haven't missed something. Vice Chair Barnett.
Yeah, I missed something when we were talking about driveways, which is the desk item from Adam Mayer that we received today. And he had thoughts about configurations of buildings that would require one driveway, for example, and that having two would preclude a viable architectural approach to multifamily use. So I would just suggest that we commend to the town council that they consider that.
I have a question for staff. Thank you for bringing that. I was thinking that was kind of related to this whole access corridor discussion, but maybe there's more to it because, he's doing a 4-unit thing on the property, and I don't know if it's under. It doesn't sound like it was under SB9, but is this? I mean, should we consider this differently than the discussion we already had with the width of the access corridor and how to count the square footage and everything? I'm asking staff.
I believe there was some confusion in terms of the driveway requirements when you're talking about a 2-unit development that's on a single parcel versus the requirements if you do a subdivision, and so then you have 2 separate lots. I don't know if Mr. Safdie or Director Paulson has more to add to that.
I would just add that, ultimately the example he has, as you mentioned, is a 4-plex with one driveway, which would be on one lot. If we're going to have a flag lot or an easement to a second lot, we have to have at least a minimum of one driveway to each of those lots. I think otherwise would be too challenging on most configurations. But the only thing that comes to mind if there's a big concern about that would be to, from his comments, limit the number of driveways to a maximum of 1 per lot. Again, that would be potentially restrictive for a large lot that maybe did a 2-unit housing development, where it might make sense to have two lots or 2 different driveways. But that's something the Planning Commission and ultimately Council could consider.
Okay, so basically, thinking it through now that we've kind of gone through this thing, Mr. Mayor's suggestion was related to a 4-plex, which is not permitted under the current SB9, because you would have to have done a lot split to have 4 units.
Unless, of course,
no, because you could have
unit,
unless it was a
junior.
Junior ADU. Yeah. So, but what he showed us pictures of is not currently possible under SB9 as written. Is that right?
Unless all of the units were similar in size. I mean, you'd need to be 3 of those units would have to be 1,200 square feet or less. So it's potential. There is potential, I guess, that it could be something like that, but they probably wouldn't be as large as was shown in his illustration.
So is there, I mean, but if we wanted to make it so that to encourage people to have multiple units on a property and we only wanted them to have one driveway, what would we have to do differently? You're saying,
as I mentioned earlier, yeah, you could impose a maximum of 1 driveway per lot, and that would cover the scenario he has, which would be confined by our FAR ultimately, and then would also allow for access to a newly created lot if an urban lot split's developed.
Okay.
So that would create a maximum of 2 with an urban lot split and a maximum of 1 if you decided to do 2-unit development and 2 ADUs on 1 existing lot.
Okay, good. It took me a couple tries to get it. So, so I actually think that sounds pretty good. I mean, Vice Chair Barnett, what do you think? Since you brought up the thing, because I thought, Mr. Mayor's letter was, great, and I think that's the kind of thing that we'd like to see. So,
I guess the challenge would be making that an objective standard when we want to have other situations with 2 driveways. I'm not sure how we could carve that out, but maybe it could be.
Other thoughts on this? So maybe we could leave it at that we think it's a good idea, but maybe it needs more research, to see if there would be maybe problematic to limit the number of driveways. Okay, let's see if are there other things that we missed in the comments or that were on people's minds relative to SB 9 before we make a recommendation to town council? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. All right. Does anyone feel brave enough to go ahead and make a recommendation that we could vote on?
If it would be helpful for staff to list out the modifications that have been discussed this evening, we could give a try at that.
If you could do that, that would be helpful. So I made notes, but yeah.
I'll put out there a list and we'll see if anyone has modifications or changes or additions to that. So I heard 9 items. Some were modifications to the ordinance. Some were just discussion items or recommendations. So item 1 was support for access easement for flag lots, in addition to the way that it's written right now. Number 2 would be to remove the 20-foot requirement, reducing that to a 12-foot width for those that access to the rear lot. Number 3 was removal of the requirement of right angles for new lot lines. Number 4 was about grading. It was to limit, to keep the limits on grading, but to allow light wells as minimally required by the building code and allow driveways per fire requirements to be exempt from grading, so not trigger a grading permit. Number 5 was just a recommendation that fire review early in the process would be good, but no modification to the ordinance. Number 6 was to provide some clarification on the frontage requirement. Number 7 was in regards to the 30% slope, again, clarifying the language there that it just applies to where the house would be located, the homes. Number 8 would be to explore an optional affordability requirement, that there might be some benefits, and provide some information on that for town council. And number 9 was an additional discussion item about driveways, about whether restriction to 1 driveway per lot maximum, or in some cases 2, but no change to the ordinance. And Mr. Safdie, did you have anything different?
Thank you. I did hear just one additional one. To be more clear in the definitions in terms of primary structure in relation to the accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units.
Okay. And then these weren't actual changes, but were things we decided not to change. Do we need to go over that as well? Like, for example, we decided not to add any other zones. We didn't want to change anything with the windows.
No, the motion can just be the changes that you want to make or recommend to the draft ordinance.
Okay. All right. Good. Did we miss anything else? Does any Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Janoff?
Thank you, Chair. I think that I just want to make sure that I know that I think that we want to keep how is the second story step back, but I'm looking at my notes. I think I'm still a little bit confused about that one. So I just want to confirm that what we all agreed to and nodded our head was we didn't want to change that.
That is what I heard.
That's what I heard too.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to confirm.
Okay, Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, just back to the historic districts. Are they exempted from SB 9 currently, or do we want to specifically say that?
Historic districts and properties that are built pre-1941 are designated by our ordinance to be considered historic, and therefore SB 9 would not apply to those properties.
Okay, so that's clear. That's clear in there. Okay.
Correct.
If you read if you had a chance to read the actual SB 9, it clearly spells out that they intended to exclude historic properties from this SB 9 law, as well as anything in an earthquake zone, all the other exceptions that were wetlands and stuff that were listed that are listed in our ordinance and listed in the SB 9 law.
Right, but we could be more lenient and include those if we wanted to. So I just wanted to make sure where we did stand. And to that point, I had a question. I think in the ordinance it talks about a limitation on excluding very high fire severity zones. I was under the impression that all of Los Gatos is in a high is in a high or extremely high zone, like even more extreme than Paradise, which burned. So can staff just clarify, is this a relatively small area for Los Gatos? Is this a pretty large area? Sorry.
Thank you for that question. No, this is actually something that there was extensive discussion, both for the town of Los Gatos and other agencies when SB 9 first was put into place. And there is that section that says that it doesn't apply in those higher fire areas, but it says except when, I don't know, we've got the exact language, but basically it's saying, if you meet the building code and the fire requirements for construction, then you can build.
Okay.
So in the end, because we've adopted the fire regulations that they list there, and any new buildings have to comply with that, then they are allowed in those areas.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that.
That was a great question to ask, though, because that was such a big issue when we were going to our general plan. It's an ongoing issue for everybody, not just in Los Gatos, but all through California. But it sounds like it's not going to prevent SB 9. So, okay. All right. So is anybody ready to make a motion to recommend this to council with the changes that we have recommended so far? Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, I move to recommend approval of Ordinance 2327 to the council, together with the proposed amendments, changes, and recommendations that we have processed today.
Okay, thank you for that.
If I may, Chair, we don't actually have an ordinance number. What we would be recommending is that that you are looking at attachment or exhibit 1 to the staff report, which is the draft permanent ordinance. It is based on the previous ordinance, but exhibit 1 is what we would ask you include in your recommendation.
I'm happy
is the maker of the motion? You're okay with that?
Happy to revise my motion to refer to exhibit 4 instead of ordinance 2327.
Okay. Thank you. And is Commissioner Janoff making a second?
I am making a second, but I think it's exhibit 1, not 4.
Okay. Maker of the motion, exhibit 1, okay?
Yes, that was my intention, exhibit 1.
Okay. All right. And then your second is good for exhibit 1. Yes.
Second that.
Okay. All right, great. Any further discussion? Okay, we will do roll call vote. start with Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Tavana,
Yes.
Commissioner Raspy,
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff, Vice Chair Barnett,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. And I know the answer to this, but just to say for the sake of clarity, there are no appeal rights on this action by the commission. Correct?
That is correct, because it is a recommendation to town council.
Okay. All right, good. Well, that was a great discussion. And so we will conclude with a couple of remaining items, including the report from the Director of Community Development.
Thank you. I will keep it short this evening. 2 points to share. One is that the Housing Element Advisory Board is scheduled to meet next month on the 20th of October, at which time they will be reviewing the draft of the housing element that is currently in progress, but will be going to HCD for their review, including modifications from as a result of public comment. The other item is that we do not currently have any items scheduled for the next Planning Commission meeting on October 12th, and so we do expect that meeting will be canceled.
Okay, thank you for that. And so then we will move on to the subcommittee reports. In addition to their service on the Planning Commission, every member of the Planning Commission serves in an additional capacity on a subcommittee. And the committees include the Historic Preservation Committee, the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee, and the General Plan Committee. And this year and part of last year, the Conceptual Development or the General Plan Committee has basically morphed into the Housing Element Advisory Board, which includes some additional community members. As mentioned, we've been meeting regularly, as Ms. Armour was describing. So what we want to do is find out if there were any meetings of any of these bodies in between our last meeting on the 14th and today. And I believe there was a historic preservation meeting today. So Commissioner Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the HPC met earlier today at 4 o'clock. We had 2 matters on calendar. One was the removal of a presumptively historic structure pre-1941, and the other was a demolition and new construction in a historic district. And we had a lively discussion and considered and decided both.
Okay, very good. Was there a meeting of Conceptual Development Advisory Committee in the last 2 weeks? No. Okay.
We haven't met since at least
And the
2 last meetings.
Okay. And the Housing Element Advisory Board actually did meet the day after our last Planning Commission meeting. The sole purpose of that meeting was to receive public comment. As noted by Ms. Armour, the housing element is currently in a public review period. And that then it will go to HCD, but we also offered the opportunity for the public to make comments on the draft housing element, which we did receive some comments, but probably not as many as we have gotten in writing and in other vehicles. So we've done that. And then, as Ms. Armour noted, we will be meeting again in October. And I think that covers everything. Is there any other matters that commissioners want to discuss? Okay, well then I will thank everyone for all their excellent comments this evening and on all of our items. And thank you for your time and service, and say that this meeting is adjourned, and we will see you all at our next meeting, probably in late October, the 26th. Okay, very good. This meeting is adjourned. Good night.